the most brutal commander of the mercenary army. And bloodthirsty, one from Tibicana wrote a letter to Princess Shinsia. In this letter, he made her a marriage proposal. A marriage advantageous by contract. But 2 weeks had already passed without a response. Princess Shinsia, Liana Arzak. She reread the letter with the marriage proposal. These thoughts worried her counselors. They said this commander was a true barbarian, and that his people didn't even know decency. His closest aides couldn't understand how he dared to propose something like that, knowing that Her Highness already had a fiancé. The protagonist asked the officials what to do if she refused. She told them they knew perfectly well that the castle didn't have the strength to resist the occupants. The commander claimed that Arzak still had strength to fight, and that he himself was willing to die for his lady. The young woman replied to Sir Viros that the Tibicana army had been besieging the castle for half a month because of the proposal. He cut off all supply routes. With regret, she reminded the officials that in 2 weeks the water reserves and food in Arzak had almost run out. The protagonist knew perfectly well that her people were tired, and that the soldiers had lost faith in victory. The invaders besieging the castle are the most brutal mercenaries, and merciless in this world. No one dared to face them. Since it was useless, it was equivalent to walking to their own death. Even Lekis, the largest kingdom on the continent, had to surrender and sign a humiliating peace treaty. For Tibicana, the siege of the small and half-destroyed Shinsia is like hunting a weak rabbit. An entertainment. Liana concluded that resisting was useless, especially since little time was left before the castle inhabitants died of hunger. The protagonist announced that she would accept the proposal from the commander of Tibicana. Her counselors were shocked and angry at her carelessness, since she simply didn't know what kind of monster he was. The young woman replied that she had heard enough rumors about him, including the most terrible ones. It is said that they prefer to see men in bed, not women, explained one of the princess's aides. The reason is that women who spent the night with them simply did not survive, as they could not bear such cruelty. Sir Burrows shouted how the princess could even consider accepting a marriage if the mercenaries' partners died during the act. Liana said she knew those barbarians were monsters, but it was unlikely that someone with such intentions would make a proposal. The protagonist supposed that the leader of those bandits did not plan to kill her. The man begged the lady to reconsider and remember Lord Felter, who had left to seek help from the kingdom of Shark. The young man was the princess's true love. She valued him more than her own life and protected him like the apple of her eye. The girl remembered that he had promised to return in 10 days. But many more had passed since then. Since that day, the Felter family has not acted and only watches silently from the sidelines. Sir Viros pointed out that they were the most powerful house in Shinsia. You cannot cut off all ties with them just like that. Princess Liana said she had no intention of debating it. They could not wait any longer. She firmly decided that, as heir to the House of Arzak, she had to pay this price to protect Nok and save its inhabitants. After an hour, next to the castle walls, a tent was set up for negotiations. But the seat of the mercenary forces commander was empty. Sir Viros was outraged. How could they be late for such a meeting? Apparently, courtesy is unknown to them. Her Highness said that, at least. Now she had time to prepare mentally and reflect on everything. Lord Tibecan, commander of the most powerful army on the continent, was born from the union between the god of war and a mortal woman whom he subdued with his strength. It is said that the god of death cursed him so that the earth would reject his flesh, thus condemning him to eternal battles where he could not die. Liana thought that, since Lord Tibecan had a reputation for being cruel, she must not show her fear under any circumstances. Sir Viros told the lady that he heard the neighing of horses, shouts of people, and the clash of swords. He concluded that they were sounds of battle, and supposed that Lord Felter had returned with reinforcements and was fighting against the Tibecan army. The young woman rejoiced that Nok was safe, and she would not have to accept that horrible proposal. The counselor shared the lady's joy, but insisted that she follow him immediately to a safe place. He suggested taking refuge somewhere, and from there calmly assess the situation, as the mercenary forces would not have time to deal with them, and they would not notice them. The princess and Sir Viros hurried towards the exit when suddenly an intense light flooded the tent due to the appearance of a man at the entrance. He apologized for the delay, and the princess was surprised by his temperature, shoulder width and hand size, and feet. Liana realized that this grim man, and tainted with the smell of blood, was the bastard of the god of war. The girl thought that, despite his darkness, the boy was incredibly handsome. He said that an urgent matter had arisen, but that everything was already resolved, and he offered the princess a seat. Liana begged herself to calm down, because although the boy didn't seem like a real barbarian, that didn't mean he wasn't dangerous. Her Highness said she was pleased to meet Lord Tivakin, but she wanted to know why he had made her wait. He replied that the cause had been an ambush by enemy troops, and the protagonist thought that reinforcements had really arrived. She was glad, but maintained an impassive face, and proposed postponing this meeting, as the young man had more important matters than an engagement. The boy replied that it was not necessary, as he had already resolved everything. He asked his aide to bring something for the princess. When the aide placed the bloodstained sword on the table, Her Majesty recognized Lord Felter's weapon in it. Liana guessed that her beloved had died with the reinforcements. The Lord said that it was proof that he had resolved all his affairs. He asked to get to the point and asked the girl what her answer would be. The protagonist was trembling from head to toe, but she convinced herself to compose herself and take control of the situation. She said she wanted to remind the Lord about good manners, since in Shenxia it is not customary to bring weapons to a commitment discussion. The young man heard the princess's observation and threw the sword onto the floor with such force that it stuck halfway in. He pointed out that he did not intend to offend Her Highness. He just wanted to show that whoever might have been the reason for refusal no longer existed. The girl hesitated. She had underestimated the Lord, as he not only wanted to marry her, but to take everything from her and annex all of Nock. He is like a beast at home, playing with his prey before devouring it. Liana realized she had to save herself and cancel the engagement negotiations, but do so in a way that avoided bloodshed. She pleaded with the Lord that Lord Tibakin believe her lie, and affirmed that she had already shared a bed with her murdered lover. Liana decided to counterattack the mercenary commander by informing him that she carried Lord Felter's son in her womb. Sir Viros was shocked by the lady's words, and she, with a smile, asked the Lord if he still insisted on marriage. Liana declared that it was evident that through the alliance with her, the man intended to gain control over Nock. She warned that, regardless of what happened with the marriage, the future ruler of Nock would be the son she carried in her belly. The blood that runs in the veins of the state's ruler will not be Tibakin. The man understood that the cost would be greater than expected. He asked the princess if she would recognize the son's right to the throne, and if she would agree to marry him. The girl did not expect this. The Lord added that Her Highness should be allowed to give birth, but that from now on they would belong to him forever. Upon concluding the negotiations, Lord Tibakin offered to escort the princess and extended his hand to help her mount the horse. She said she was not used to such gestures and was forced to refuse the offered help. The man assured her that he would do everything possible to make things different in the future. His confidence charmed Her Majesty, and she extended her hand towards him. He thanked the young woman for her trust and suggested they act like this from now on, trusting him until they got to know each other better. He noticed a small wound on the young woman's palm, but it didn't bother him. The farewell ended with a long and passionate protective kiss on the hand. Liana left, and the aide of the mercenary chief was indignant at the Lord's decision to marry a pregnant princess. He reminded him that the goal was to avoid bloodshed and gain control over Nog. But that was too high a price. The lord told his subordinate that he was right. His goal had always been to dominate Nok. Firmo stated that it was necessary to reject the agreement, since an illegitimate son would be a big problem. The lord declared that now it was necessary to rely on Her Majesty. And his aide was surprised by the sudden decision. He recalled that Lord Tibekin had been so indifferent to the opposite sex that unfounded rumors had spread. The lord replied that he understood that he could not make Her Majesty love him if her heart belonged to another. He added that the child meant nothing to him, and the aide burst out laughing. Did the lord expect reciprocal feelings? Firmos commented that the certainty of conquering the princess suggested that the lord had loved her a long time ago. He explained that he only wanted to reclaim what belonged to him. And the aide was perplexed. He speculated that the lord was talking about Nok. But why did he need that poor nation? Perhaps it held a hidden past. Lord Fortivaken ordered Firmos to calm down and stop meddling as if he wished. He would reveal everything to his aide. Liana Arzek admired the sunset and remembered her beloved, who had once asked her to trust him. Felter begged her to believe in the sincerity of his feelings, even if his uncle insisted on the engagement with the princess. The young woman cried, remembering how he had promised to convince her, even if it took his whole life. Liana mentally said goodbye to him and wished that in the land of the dead he would find someone who loved him with the same intensity. She never allowed her fiancé more than a kiss, since their relationship was purely contractual. The Felter family insisted on the marriage because they sought power, while Liana exploited her influence for her own benefit. She was still using her late fiancé, but she would try to hide the truth about the baby. Although Liana doubted if she would manage to trick someone whose gaze was as cruel as that of a bloodthirsty predator. She was pulled from her thoughts by the voice of Sir Maithlu, who was calling her. Liana apologized and asked him to continue his report. He announced that the city had replenished its reserves, which would last for 3 months, thanks to her minimizing expenses. The princess sighed with relief, knowing she had 3 months. The advisor advised her to stop being stubborn and finally increase taxes. He argued that the 20-year drought would not stop overnight. Therefore, she did not want to force her people to suffer more. Although the advisor assured her that raising taxes would alleviate the situation, Liana reflected that the man had a point, since revenues were decreasing year after year. Regardless of trade alliances, the princess concluded happily that accepting the lord's proposal had been right. Although Sir Maitlo pointed out that she had acted hastily, he added that Her Highness should have consulted the Felter family first. The young woman sighed annoyed, assuring him she would contact them to coordinate funeral preparations. Sir Maitlo noted that the royal family should observe mourning, as the deceased young man was the heir to the Felter lineage. Liana commented that this gesture of respect might offend her current fiancé, so it would be convenient to talk to him first. The princess's counselor was outraged, asking how she cared about the feelings of a savage. He added that the Grand Chancellor would be horrified if he heard such words, and a shiver ran down Her Highness's body. Probably the Grand Chancellor, Lyndon Felter, is furious about the current situation. He intended to take over the country by marrying off his nephew to the princess. But now all his plans have fallen apart. Liana was mentally angry, thinking that man had plundered so much from her land, but still didn't consider it enough. The princess announced that if Sir Maitlo had concluded his report, he could leave the necessary documents on the table and withdraw. Upon leaving the office, the counselor commented that the Felter family has long been linked to Nakam. He warned Her Highness that ignoring the interests of this lineage could cost the country dearly, and her personally. When the princess was left alone, she realized that even amidst mourning, she couldn't stop thinking about politics. She looked at the clock and realized that soon they would transport Lord Felter's body to the castle. Liana decided she should dress in mourning attire. But then she remembered that Lord Tibekin had promised to arrive together with those transporting the body. She decided she should receive her new fiancé in appropriate attire. A smile appeared on the princess's face as she realized how hypocritical and selfish she was. Liana realized she wanted to please another man, even though her fiancé had died several days ago. In the princess's chambers, the nanny, in tears, said she had brought the best dresses. She doubted that such barbarians deserved a proper welcome. Liana replied that she must maintain her dignity and comply with the rules of courtesy. The servant begged her lady not to look too beautiful, as the barbarians did not deserve to contemplate such beauty. She pointed out that precisely these murderers had taken the life of Her Highness's beloved. The princess said she understood and shared Madame Flambit's feelings. But now she was engaged to Lord Tivikin. She explained that it would be inappropriate and inconsiderate to speak of the ex-fiancé in the presence of the future husband. Princess Liana confessed that she had news that no one knew yet. Her Highness said she was pregnant, and Madame Flambit entered a true hysteria. The princess begged the nanny to behave more discreetly and asked how long it would be before it was noticeable that she was carrying a child. But she didn't have time to answer, since it was suddenly announced that the chief of the Tibecan mercenary army had arrived at the castle gates. A brilliant sun illuminated Nasio, and 6 coffins were unloaded in the courtyard of the Arzak Palace. Liana mentally wondered if her fiancé's first gift for the marriage promise would be corpses. Lord Tibicana's personal assistant noted that the bodies had not been desecrated. Furthermore, they had been assigned coffins. His Excellency was thanked for returning the dead home in dignified condition. A lord approached the princess and told her that another day had passed, and the engagement issue remained unresolved. He insisted that the terms of the engagement must be agreed upon immediately. Ilina proposed moving to the conference room. Firmos affirmed that both sides were interested in the marriage taking place as soon as possible. He explained that winter was approaching, and that the Tibicana army wished to dismantle the camp and find suitable shelter from the cold. The young man added that the haste for the marriage would also benefit Her Highness's son. Sir Madlo was shocked when a son was mentioned, since he knew that the princess had never been with Lord Felter. He asked Her Highness whose son it was. She replied that the child was hers. The princess's answer coincided with that of Lord Tibicana, who at the same time claimed the child was his. Liana's eyes widened in surprise, fearing that the young man would start tarnishing her honor with lies. He affirmed that he would raise the princess's son as his own and protect his right to the throne with his name. The young woman sighed in relief, while Sir Maslow was angry and demanded an explanation of what was happening. Liana understood that she was acting brazenly, but there was no turning back now. She was scared, as she didn't know how the bloodthirsty lord would react upon discovering they had lied to him. Now, she only had time to say there was a miscarriage, or spend the night with the lord as soon as possible, and provide an heir. The problem was that she would have to pretend to be an experienced woman in bedroom matters, and silently endure the pain of the first time. Aliana was worried that he could guess everything and realize there was never a son. Firmaz summarized that the wedding should take place in the next 2 weeks, because it would be difficult to hide that the princess is pregnant. Sir Maitlo objected that it was a rushed date, since not even the wedding dress could be prepared in such little time. The lord said that the princess would not need to worry about anything, that he himself would procure the outfits and resolve all organizational matters. He inquired if there was any other reason why the princess wanted to postpone the imminent wedding. She was afraid to admit it, so she blurted out that the dress wasn't the only reason. She said that Naka's financial situation is dire. Liana added that it would not be possible to gather the necessary resources to prepare the wedding in such a short time. The lord said that, if the problem was only economic, it would be easily solved, and he asked Firmos to place a chest on the table. The lord's aide pointed out that the gold had been brought along, and hoped it was a more suitable wedding gift than the coffins. The princess and her counselors looked fascinatedly at the chest of gold. Farimos said that the marriage contract specifies that the throne of Nayak will belong to the son born to Her Highness. Furthermore, Tivakan will swear allegiance to the House of Arsec and become their royal guard. Sir Maeshlo complained that hiring Tivakan's forces as a royal guard would be costly, and that the gifted gold would not suffice. Farimos hurried to calm the man, assuring him that Milord would also cover those expenses. The young woman did not understand where so much nobility came from. If the warriors of Tibakan become soldiers of the royal family, Nayak will transform into the strongest bastion among the 5 kingdoms of the continent. Liana pointed out that the Lord assumed all wedding expenses, giving security over a bright future for the country. He promised to recognize the rights of a son alien to the throne and take an oath of loyalty to the House of Arzak. Her Highness declared that Milord would not only gain no benefits from the opportunities offered, but would also ruin his reputation. The young woman said she didn't believe everything was so good. The boy probably had something planned. He replied that he had no reason to deceive. Liana pointed out that Nock doesn't need strong support. Furthermore, no one would want to acquire ruined lands. The young man recalled the princess's recent suitor, Lord Felter, and pointed out that, however, there might be those who desire those lands, regardless of whether it is to obtain Nock or the princess. Farimo said he would take silence as consent and proposed to the princess's counselors to withdraw to discuss the details of the contract. Her Highness and Lord Tibekan were left alone. The young woman thought the room was oppressing her too much, and that she would suffocate now. Liana thought she would feel better outdoors, and decided to head to the castle's backyard garden. Leaving a guest alone contravened the rules of courtesy, so she suggested the Milord accompany her. The boy accepted and offered Her Majesty his arm so they could lean on each other during the walk. The young woman was surprised to see that the barbarian and murderer acted like a true gentleman. It seemed to Liana like walking with a bear, as he was tall and stout, and his hands were so strong. The boy noticed that the wound on the princess's palm had worsened, and bet that she hadn't taken care of it. He concluded that the girl needed to take better care of herself, and from now on he himself would monitor every scratch on her body. The boy pressed his lips against the bruise on her hand again. The princess got scared, took a step back, and affirmed that she was fine. Liana suggested continuing the walk, but internally she thought it was ironic that the Lord was talking about taking care of herself, since he was the biggest current threat to her. The young people reached the garden, but they found nothing but bare trees and shrubs with dry branches. The protagonist decided it had been a bad idea to come to the garden, and hoped the Lord wouldn't take it as mockery. Liana remembered that this garden was once considered the most beautiful in the country, but now it was all that Nock could offer Lord Tibekan. She considered its symbolism that would make the boy reflect on the idea that this country didn't deserve such investment. The Lord noticed the princess's sad face and asked what was wrong. She replied that she regretted calling him to this garden, where there was nothing to show. The boy pointed out that he wouldn't put it that way, since the princess was here. She didn't expect to hear such flattering words. Lord Tibekan asked the young woman not to move, and pulled her roughly towards him. The Lord collapsed onto Liana with his full weight, and she saw an enemy arrow stick into his shoulder. His soldiers rushed towards Lord Tibekan and asked if he was okay. The young man ordered the damned person who attacked him to be captured immediately and brought alive. A satisfied smile appeared on the archer's face, as he had already escaped and was hiding, enjoying the screams and the uproar. Her Highness asked the Lord how he felt, and if he was seriously wounded. She couldn't understand who would have taken such a desperate step, and risky the hospitable reputation and friendly reputation of Naka. The young woman began to tremble with nervousness, and convinced the Lord that Naka had nothing to do with the attack. Liana also asked how she could help him, and he replied that he preferred to help the princess. He put his arm around her waist to help her up, but Her Majesty retorted that of the two, the wounded one was the Lord. Lord Tibekan said that was true, But the princess was trembling like a leaf, and if she continued like this, she would faint. The princess and the lord were very close, and he accidentally brushed against some sensitive areas of her body, which deeply embarrassed him. He suggested returning to the building immediately, as it was safer, but he continued to hold her by the waist so she wouldn't fall. Firmos received his lord with laughter and sarcastically asked how he managed to catch an arrow. The lord silently endured Firmos's teasing, while his aide kept insisting, assuming the archer had eagle eyes to hit the lord. Lord Tibakan could not take it anymore and ordered Firmos to shut up immediately. He asked the princess to sit down, as she can barely stand, and looks like she is about to faint at any moment. The princess assured the milord that she felt fine and wanted to know how serious his wound was. The lord's personal assistant replied that the arrow had not hit vital points, but it had entered quite deeply. He deduced that the wounded shoulder would hurt a lot, and that the lord would suffer a fever. If the tip was poisoned, the situation would be much worse, stated Serviros, who assured that the castle guard would find the attacker without fail. He assured that, if the arrow was poisoned, they would quickly find an antidote for Lord Tibakan. Firmos expressed that he had no doubt that the scoundrel who shot at the lord would be captured. But the real problem was not him, but his employer. He added that he did not wish to believe that the arrow was a gesture to demonstrate Naok's true intentions. Serviros did not like it. He started shouting that the man was insinuating a lack of honor by suggesting they themselves had committed the attack. Her Highness ordered the man to be quiet and affirmed that there were opponents to the marriage in Naok, but they did not represent the entire nation. She acknowledged that the main dream of her nation was peace, and nobody wished for the rupture of the marriage agreement. Lord Tibakan affirmed that he wished the same, and his intentions had not changed. Firmos informed the lord that, with his permission, he wished to entrust the case to the Tibakan forces to find the shooter. Silveros became enraged again and asked why he would do so if the soldiers of House Arzak were already handling the case. The lord's aide asked him not to take it personally, since the Tibakana Armada considers it a duty to find the one who tried to kill their commander. The assistant went to the princess, begging her to do something, and she wondered if marriage with the lord would always be like this. The lord of Tibakana developed a fever from his wound. The princess spent all her time next to her new fiancé's bed. The nanny begged her to go rest, since with such a high temperature, he wouldn't even remember that the bride was here. The young woman replied that her direct obligation was to care for him in such a difficult moment. She observed the beads of sweat on his body and understood that the doctor had not been mistaken in predicting a severe fever. Liana remembered that after the wound, the lord seemed calm. That's why she felt confident that everything would work out well. Now it was evident that his calmness came from being accustomed to wounds, since according to the scars on his body, he had been wounded frequently. The young woman handed Madame Flambe a handkerchief and asked her to wipe the sweat from the lord. The nanny sadly asked the princess how she was going to marry someone she didn't even want to touch. The protagonist asked the woman to speak more quietly, since they were not alone. The lord was there. Then she clarified that it wasn't something she couldn't touch him for, but that she believed Madame Flambe would do it better. She ordered the nanny to bring a towel and more water. She would do it herself. Liana wiped the lord with a damp towel and thought that every movement felt really unpleasant and challenging. However, she understood that this feeling was not like simple disgust. The young woman couldn't understand if she hated him hating, or not to her fiancé. For some reason, the boy evoked many emotions in her, but she couldn't even explain what bothered her about that man. Suddenly, my lord opened his eyes and mumbled that if the touch of the princess was unbearable, she should tell him what was bothering her. Her Highness exclaimed upon realizing that Lord Tivakin hadn't been asleep and had heard everything. The protagonist asked the lord how long he pretended to be asleep and what he had heard. Lord Tivakin said he had heard the part where the princess mentioned that touching him wasn't that unbearable for her. The boy commented that perhaps it was because of the fever, but he wanted to clarify something. Gently, he placed his hand on the princess's face and told her he wanted to know what her limit was. She pulled away abruptly and affirmed that Milord had a high fever and that he shouldn't waste time talking, but rest. The boy replied that Her Highness was right. Indeed, he was weak from the fever, but he wanted to verify something. He brought a finger to his lips and asked her if that contact was tolerable for her. Then he ran his hand through the princess's hair and clarified if she objected to that step. After that, he slid his fingers down her neck. But the young woman shouted that it was enough and pulled back her hand from his face. She asked how much more he was going to keep checking. When he made the proposal precisely at the moment she should have been busy with her fiancé's funeral. Liana was indignant when asking how Milord, under those circumstances, expected to get feelings in return, as if they were lovers. The boy replied that he was just not entirely sure of his actions due to the fever. But he certainly knew he wouldn't hand the bride over to anyone. He took Liana's hand and suggested that a kiss was too serious a step for Her Majesty. She confirmed the Milord's assumption, and he replied that the princess could not deny it forever, since he was her fiancé, not just an admirer. He insisted on asking what he could do to get permission. The girl thought that no matter how sincere the Lord's feelings were, since he had made so many promises that his alliance with Nock would be beneficial, she decided she would not allow promises to turn into empty words, and she would make the connection between them genuine. It occurred to Liana that she could take advantage of the Lord's clouded judgment and asked him to promise not to destroy Nock. The boy wondered what he would offer the princess in exchange for that promise. The protagonist decided to convince the Lord that their union was real and indissoluble. She assured him that, for her part, she would guarantee that she would always wait for Lord Tibecan and sincerely long for him. Her words impressed the Lord so much that he roughly grabbed her by the waist. He pulled her close and kissed her. He whispered that, if he had wanted to destroy and ruin Naok, he would have done it from the beginning, instead of proposing to Liana. The kiss was long and passionate. The protagonist didn't realize that her head was already on the pillow. The boy covered the girl's neck with kisses, and she begged herself not to lose her head, since at that moment he was speaking due to the fever. Liana was sure that the passion would disappear when the Milord's temperature dropped, but she decided to trust this brief impulse. Suddenly, the Lord stopped, since he realized that it was enough, as he didn't know how far he could go hiding behind the fever. The princess sadly stroked, and regretfully, the fiancé's bandaged chest, and asked for forgiveness. She said that for a moment, she forgot that the Lord was unwell, wishing him a speedy recovery. And a good night, Her Highness left the room of the wounded Lord. In the hallway, the young woman wondered if those words were sincere, or just the delirium of a sick man, if she fulfilled her promise. But the most important question was whether the warm, tender and passionate affection of the Lord towards her would change after discovering the lie. Meanwhile, Serviros was walking through the castle's backyard, where the attack had occurred. Under his feet, he found a leaf-shaped keychain, and was horrified to recognize its owner. He headed to the princess's chambers to inform her, but found her in the hallway. Her Highness asked Serviros why he was walking around the castle so late, and the counselor asked her to speak quietly. He replied that although he had arrived alone, he wasn't sure they weren't being followed, and explained that it was necessary to discuss something urgent. The man handed her the leaf-shaped keychain and asked if she recognized it. Liana said that object belonged to Lord Felter. The commander replied that they had found it near the spot where the arrow was shot from. The young woman realized that this could mean that the archer was her ex-fiancé. Laffit Felter. Her Highness lost her balance and barely managed to stay standing upon realizing that her ex-fiancé was alive and had shot at Lord Tibecan. Serviros tried to support the princess and said there was no certainty that Lord Felter was alive. The man suggested that someone else could have used Sir Lafitta's bow. Suddenly, Liana remembered that no one had opened or inspected the brought coffins. She decided to confirm it herself and go to the chapel. Cerveros opened the lid of Lord Felter's coffin. The princess affirmed that it certainly carried Sir Lafitta's armament. But it wasn't him. Liana said that clearly her ex-fiancé was alive. He was the one who shot and seems determined to wage a shadow war. The counselor supposed he was hiding in his uncle's house. The Grand Chancellor. The girl let out a sigh of relief. At least her ex-fiancé was safe. Cerveros advised her to contact him secretly. He proposed writing him a secret letter to Lafitta. At that moment, a loud bang on the door made the princess turn around abruptly. And her counselor saw Firmos, who scrutinized Her Highness with a suspicious look, and asked what they were doing there. The boy dared to think that the princess wanted to examine the bodies of the dead herself. He recalled that in Shenxia, there is a custom that recommends not looking at the deceased until their burial. Liana assured him that she only wished to say goodbye to Lord Felter in private, since the burial is tomorrow, and it is the last chance. The princess asked if it was a problem. Firmus replied that everything was fine, but he had to inform Lord Tivaken. He said it was time to leave, and upon saying goodbye, he expressed hope that the Tibacan army would soon find the archer. The Lord's aide thanked the princess, but in his mind, he thought the wish sounded insincere. Sir Biras left the room with the princess and wondered what would happen now with her new marriage. This doubt led the young woman to reflect that she could not choose between her loyalty to Fidu and the recent passion with the Lord. She knew that the Felter house would do everything to protect the heir, while the Lord of Tibacan would try to destroy them all. Liana didn't know if she should remain faithful to her heart and her ex-fiancé or surrender to Tibacan to ensure a prosperous future for Nock. She was so absorbed in her thoughts that she didn't even notice that she had said out loud that they should act quickly. Cerveros asked Her Highness what she was referring to, and both quickly excused themselves by saying they had to contact the families of the deceased. She asked that her desire to meet personally be communicated, and she froze at the counselor's assumption that the Lord might suspect something. Firmos told his lord that they had lied to him when they claimed the deceased was Fidu Felter's. He added that the helmet did not match the armor of the commander of the Arzak Knights, as if they had forgotten to change it in a hurry. The Lord affirmed that perhaps by a miracle, the princess's surviving fiancé had entered the castle, although he could also have escaped far away. His personal assistant said that Sir Felters had been a fool, since everything was over. And after a fight, you don't blame yourself. The Lord suspected that perhaps Fidu was not there for Nock. But to help the princess, Firmos asked his lord if he truly believed that the surviving young man planned to run away with his unconsummated fiancé. He added that it is practically impossible. It is enough to remember how enthusiastic he is about defending his country's interests. The young man asked if the Lord really believed that Lafitte was the one who shot. He said that Lafitte perfectly masters the bow, having been commander of the Arzak Knights, and added that it is unlikely that he injured the Lord, since he is not someone who can be easily hit. He laughed and commented that it is almost impossible, unless the Lord intentionally put himself in the arrow's trajectory. But the Lord did not answer, so Firmos shouted that it was absurd, and that the Lord had lost his mind by doing such a thing for Shenxia. The Lord's aide protested. He could not risk his health like that, since now much effort would be needed to recover. He commented that he did not expect the princess's ex-fiancé to be a man without honor, by having tried to hurt her. Firmos was surprised that his lord was upset about almost hitting Liana Arzak. It seems that days ago, Lord Tibacan explained that he wanted the princess to obtain Shenxia. The young man deduced that the lord would be restless, since the princess could be useful to them, and it is not good for her to die now. Firmo pointed out that the princess believed her ex-fiancé was dead until she saw the corpse, but his participation in the plot could not be ruled out. The lord asked if it would not be easier to destroy the entire Felterpak family, since they had contacted the princess. At that moment, Knight Tibekan remembered Liana's plea not to destroy Shinsia. Then she would sincerely swear to mourn him. He asked Fermo not to do anything for now, since the princess's true intentions would soon be known. The boy accepted and said that anyway. He would continue monitoring and expand the search area within the castle walls. Lord Tibekan warned his subordinate to be careful and let him go. Alone in his company, the boy ran his hand over his bandaged shoulder, which hurt and throbbed. The lord remembered the frightened princess, and trembling, and thought how a wretch like Lafitte could be her lover. Lord Tibekan definitively decided to kill him. Meanwhile, Liana walked down the hallway in her morning dress. She stumbled frequently due to having lost so much weight, and the dress felt loose on her, hindering her steps. The young woman realized that she didn't yet have the resources to buy a new black dress. She became sad imagining that soon there wouldn't be a single decent dress left in her closet. The princess wondered if she would lose Lord Tibekan's interest by appearing in such a lamentable state. Her Majesty was secretly indignant at the thoughts running through her mind. The princess resolved that she did not wish to draw the lord's attention with her appearance. Upon approaching the door of the room where the wounded milord lay, she wondered if she could behave naturally knowing that Fit was still alive. She was also intrigued if he remembered that passionate night and the vows they exchanged. The protagonist understood that she couldn't speak to the lord without blushing, but she decided she had to control her emotions urgently. After all, she couldn't constantly evade her fiancé. So she decided to calm herself immediately. Liana knocked on the door, wished good morning out loud, and asked if the milord had woken up yet. There was no answer, so Her Highness sighed in relief, thinking the wounded man was still asleep, and decided to leave the tray by the closed door. Liana decided to leave the tray on the floor when the door to milord's room suddenly burst open, and he appeared in the threshold. Lord Ivakin asked if his sudden appearance had scared her. Liana assured him she was fine, but that he shouldn't exert himself to come out, since he needed to recover. The girl explained that she had brought the tray with breakfast so milord wouldn't use his injured hand. He said he would take the tray, since it wasn't heavy at all, but Her Majesty protested that he must take care of his shoulder. The boy asked if the bride cared so much about his health. The girl replied that, naturally, she cared about her fiancé, and he answered that he also cared about her. Liana was surprised and objected that she wasn't sick at all. The lord said he was talking about her dress. In the lord's room was Fermos, who exclaimed that Her Highness seemed to only have one morning dress. The girl felt embarrassed and disoriented, but managed to reply that she had several black dresses, although not in the academy. Fermos apologized for his lack of tact and asked if it was necessary for the princess to wear that dress. The protagonist was about to burn with shame over the comments about her appearance. She admitted that perhaps it was evident that the dress was too big, and that the fabric in some places was faded. Her Highness thought that the lord couldn't criticize her, since he himself was half naked. She asked him to understand, since according to tradition, she had to dress in black until the funeral, and there wasn't time to order a new dress. The lord's personal assistant apologized again and, with a surprised voice, asked if she really planned to wear it for 3 days. The princess asked if there was any problem with her morning attire, or if it didn't comply with the rules of Lord Tibikana. Fermo was mentally annoyed, wondering if this princess truly only cared about Nock. That's why she dressed like this, although it didn't seem like she chose the morning dress intending to seduce. Besides, the lord was not someone who fell for such traps. The boy remained convinced that certain parts of the dress showed too much body, and that His Excellency shouldn't see that. Suddenly, the lord ordered in a dry voice for his subordinate to shut up immediately. He advised him that, if the dress displeased him so much, he should simply not look at the lady, or close his eyes, or better yet, leave the room. Upon leaving, the boy apologized repeatedly to the princess, and asked her to take care of the Lord. Upon being left alone with the Lord, Liana wondered if she really looked that bad in that dress. She supposed that if she gained weight, the clothes would fit better. Maybe she should stop dieting. Liana wondered if she really wanted to look attractive to the milord, who had interrupted Naok's quiet life. Her Highness decided to put aside all her thoughts and concentrate on the reason she had come. Liana asked if His Excellency wanted to start with breakfast or with changing the bandages. The Lord replied that he would prefer the cure. For a moment, the young woman was happy that the fever had passed, and that her fiancé's gaze was as intense as in their first meeting. The only thing that saddened her was that the Lord's face returned to being emotionless and hard as stone, like that of a statue, the look of a wild animal. And the distant expression made the princess think that the Lord did not remember the intense night before. She sadly concluded that at that moment the milord did not remember the promises made that night. Liana wanted to start untying the bandages, but she noticed that they were as clean as if someone had recently changed them. She observed that there was no need to make a new bandage, since apparently a doctor treated him early in the morning. Lord Tibekan objected that it didn't matter, since he wanted the bride to change the bandages if she could touch him. Liana agreed to change the bandages again, and she pondered the meaning of mentioning that phrase from yesterday's conversation. That meant the Lord remembered that night. Therefore, he remembered the promises. But does it mean he will keep them? Liana became somber upon realizing that she too would have to keep the promises made. She concluded that everything happening seemed very strange, since the Lord asked to change the bandages, even though the bandage had recently been changed. The princess did not protest and agreed to do it obediently. Lafitte was looking out of his uncle's castle window, and he repeatedly whispered his beloved's name in his mind, asking her to wait a little longer. During the bandaging process, Liana remembered seeing similar scars on Lafitte. They were marks left by tree branches during a fast gallop. Before Liana's eyes appeared an image from memory, as Madame Flambit bandaged the Lord. While he held the bride's hand, he complained to the princess about the pain, like a small child, and begged her not to let go. Liana understood that she still had much to do, but her fiancé was not planning to calm down or let go of her hand. During their relationship, Liana had dreamed so many times of asking Lafitte to let her go. No one imagined that everything would turn out like this. But now the princess was personally bandaging Lord Tibekan. The boy asked if the princess had checked everything, but she didn't understand the question. Then the boy clarified that he wanted to know if she had been able to examine the bodies. And she replied yes, that yesterday she was in the chapel, because she felt it necessary to pay homage to the fallen soldiers. The Lord did not accuse the princess of lying. He placed the palm of his hand on Liana's cheek and said he wanted to clarify something about her promise. The young man recalled that Her Highness, upon examining the bodies, found Firmos, who should inform the Lord about everything. Liana understood that the Lord knew that in the armament of the commander of the Arzak Knights, Arzak lay a body that did not belong to Sir Lafitte. The boy said he wanted the marriage with the princess to be honest and transparent. Liana understood that the touch on her cheek was not a romantic gesture, but rather a warning. She replied that she also desired it with all her heart, and was willing to break all ties with the past and leave it behind. Liana understood that if she supported her ex-boyfriend, she would put herself in a losing position from the start, and the future of Shenxia would be in danger. The princess's choice became clear, and at that moment, Lord Tivekan pulled the fiancé even closer for a kiss. The young woman definitively decided, and with no turning back, to accept his lordship's hand. She replied that she did not expect a demonstration of his loyalty in that way. Although she liked it quite a bit, the boy wanted to tell her something about her outfit today. But she interrupted him, saying she was done with the bandage. Liana accidentally brushed the Lord's injured shoulder and filled with apologies, assuring him that she did not intend to cause him pain. The Lord guaranteed her that everything was fine. since he hadn't even noticed it. Moreover, it was partly his fault for getting so excited. Her Highness observed how his lordship's lips were red and swollen, exactly like yesterday. The girl thought that he liked it better that way. Fiery, she wanted him to always look at her passionately. At that very moment, Liana scolded herself for those inappropriate thoughts and moved away from the lord, saying that he would serve himself breakfast. Her Highness wished Lord Tibekan a speedy recovery and headed for the exit. A few hours later, in the princess's chambers, Sir Viros assured that it was dangerous to travel to the Felter house now, as it would arouse suspicion. The girl replied that she could invent a dozen reasons why she needed to see the Grand Chancellor. The counselor warned that Lord Tibekan would not like the news that the fiancé was secretly visiting her ex-fiancé's family. The young woman affirmed that there was no longer any reason to worry, since Lord Tibekan knew that Lord Felter was still alive. The man objected that it was impossible, since neither the commander nor any of his army knew what Sir Lafitte looked like. The princess explained that they reached that conclusion because they discovered a discrepancy between the helmet and the armor. Sir Verath pointed out that Lord Tibekan and his aide are suspicious figures. It is difficult to understand what they are thinking. The princess said that she remembers everything the Lord told her when he placed the blood-stained sword of the fiancé before her. The young man probably knew everything from the beginning. The girl concluded that Sir Viros is right. The Lord is complicated and suspicious. She specified that it is completely normal for a commander of an invincible army. Her Highness recalled a moment from the shared night. It seemed to them then that the Lord's power was not so unlimited. She decided she had to be alert and not lose vigilance. And Sir Viros asked about the true reason for the visit to Felter. The protagonist replied that she plans to convince the members of the Felter family that they should flee. The counselor tried to object to the lady, but she interrupted him and said that if he spoke of the Lord, he might stop that family. She assured him that it would be better for Naka and for Lafitte, and the man said that the lady would have to leave much in the past. The girl pointed out that Lord Tibekan has been lenient with the Felter family so far, but now he will destroy this branch. Her Highness mentioned that Lyndon Felter, as well as the whole family, will not surrender. That's why they decided to prevent a useless war. Sir Viros said that this would mean for the princess that there will be no way out of the barbarians' clutches anymore. The princess replied that she understands perfectly, but she sees no other way. At that moment, Madame Flambit entered, saying she brought a shawl for the trip, and exclaimed upon seeing the lady. She asked if the princess plans to wear this horrible dress to mourn for the next 3 days. She confirmed the nanny's assumption. Lion mentally noted that the triple criticism of her appearance had caused too much damage to her self-esteem. The young woman said she understood that the dress looked hideous, but she couldn't do anything, as she had no other black clothes. Madame Flamby retorted that, on the contrary, it was too revealing and seductive. The woman recalled that the last time the lady wore that dress was 5 years ago. Since then she had grown, and in recent months she had lost weight. She pointed out that Her Highness's mourning dress resembled that of a newlywed on her first wedding night. The nanny concluded that the dress showed off her figure too well, and said it was terrifying to imagine the barbarians seeing the princess like that. Madame Flamby especially feared the commander of the Tibecan forces, who looked at the lady as if he wanted to devour her alive. Sir Viros also had to. Madame Flamby got angry when asking why the man had spent so much time with the lady and hadn't told him anything. He replied that the princess always looked beautiful. The servant snorted discontentedly and concluded that nothing else could be expected. To the Felter castle, Her Highness traveled in another dress, because the nanny affirmed that she would not allow the lady to appear in such a brazen outfit. Madame Flamby almost forcibly made the princess change clothes. It occurred to Lion that Lord Tibekan might have thought the princess deliberately chose such a revealing dress. She glanced around and noticed that there were many soldiers from the Tibecan forces nearby. Sir Viros explained that they were searching everywhere for the attacker. Lion mentally noted that this pretext was actively used to search the entire Arzak castle. In moments like these, the young woman wonders if the attack wouldn't have been orchestrated. The counselor pointed out that if the lord had been killed, everything would have been completely different. The princess agreed. She supposed that in that case, all the inhabitants of Naka would already be dead, since the Tibetan army would not have delayed revenge. Upon arriving at the Felter Palace, Sir Viros ordered the gates opened, since the heir to the House of Arzak had arrived. Princess Liana. Lyndon Felter wondered if Her Highness had come only to personally announce the news of mourning. The young woman perceived no trace of mourning on the face of the Grand Chancellor, which means he knows his nephew is really alive. And well, the princess said she had come to announce a second piece of news. More cheerful. She added that the wedding with Lord Tibetan will take place in 10 days, and stressed that it was important for the Felter family to attend. The presence of an important family in Naka at this event will show society the alliance relationship. Lyndon smiled disdainfully and asked if Her Highness believed that anyone from the Felter family would want to attend the wedding of an enemy. The man affirmed that the princess had lost her mind, a fact confirmed by accepting the marriage proposal of a savage. Liana retorted that refusing that proposal would be an act of madness. She pointed out that the news of mourning had already been transmitted, and she prepared to leave, wishing a good preparation for the funeral. Lyndon asked if the princess shouldn't avenge the murdered fiancé, cut off the killer's head, instead of marrying him. He wondered if there wasn't enough brain in that beautiful head to assess the situation and reach that conclusion. Her Highness asked the Chancellor in a stern voice to mind his words. The man added that Naka's soldiers risk their lives, while the mercenaries of Tibetan hide in the shadows. He asked the princess to stop making up stories about her giving herself to the savages. Just for Naka, the Chancellor suggested that she didn't love her nephew at all, but only used him to entertain herself. When Lyndon dared to call her an insignificant body and cheap, her emotions erupted, and she grabbed the vase. She smashed it forcefully onto the floor, and the man concluded that the princess had a horrible temper. He told her to inform his nephew that if he still desired the safety of Naka, he should forget revenge and leave peacefully. Lyndon pointed out that the girl had changed in recent years. She had become braver, but remained a useless, insignificant person. He insisted that the princess could say whatever she wanted, but in the end, she couldn't do anything. Liana considered that she had been too understanding. When throwing the vase, she should have aimed for the Grand Chancellor's head, not the floor. The man suggested she show her savage temper among the savages. Not here. Then he suggested that she had already shown her ability when receiving blows below the waist. Her Highness loudly demanded that the man shut up immediately. And at that moment, Sir Lafitte appeared in the room. He asked his uncle to stop insulting the princess, and Lyndon was indignant that his nephew intervened when he had been ordered to stay out of it. The boy replied that, as the firstborn of the Felter family, he could not restrain himself or react, and the uncle advised him to restrain himself. He explained that the heiress of the Arzak clan had already betrayed them. But Lafitte asked his uncle to leave, and leave him alone with Liana. Lyndon fulfilled his nephew's wish, concluding that he was a fool, because that woman wasn't worth it. As soon as the man closed the door behind him, Lafitte threw himself at Liana with hugs. He began to softly repeat the princess's name and beg her to wait a little longer. Her trembling voice moved Liana, who understood that she needed more time to find the strength to say goodbye. Lafitte stammered that he did not keep his promise, and failed since the Shark Kingdom had not sent reinforcements, and the girl had asked him to flee. She explained that, as long as Lord Tibetan did not act, Lord Felter needed to leave Nok immediately. Lafitte clarified if his beloved meant that they should flee alone, and she replied that it was the only way to save everyone. He asked what Liana's salvation option was. who said that Naok meant more to her than anything else. That's why she would marry Lord Tibekan. Suddenly, Lafitte shouted that abandoning him was not a way to protect Naok. The girl replied that it was the best outcome, since the Arzak and Felter families could not face Tibekan. The boy grabbed the princess and shouted how she could be so idiotic as to give everything to foolish barbarians and add herself as a gift. Liana begged him to let her go, as it hurt. But the young man paid no attention to her pleas. He said he had heard something interesting in the Shark Kingdom about Lord Tibekan. They say he came specifically to Naok for revenge, since his parents were killed precisely there. Thanks to his agility and skill, Liana broke free from the grip of the fit and declared it was complete nonsense. The young woman explained that if he had wanted to conquer Naok, he would have started a war, not proposed marriage. Besides, he could have captured the castle of the Arzak kingdom in a few days, not just besiege it for a month. Lafitte asked if Liana believed a bloodthirsty barbarian would act rationally. The girl replied that all of Naok was already under his control. If he had wanted to, he would have destroyed it immediately. She added that there are various rumors about Tibekan. For example, that he is a homosexual. And Lafitte asked how the princess determined the gossip was false. The boy assumed she had already invited the lord to her bed. But she replied it was none of his business. She declared she had no intention of discussing matters with her fiancé. Lafitte exclaimed how she could call her fiancé a barbarian in front of him. As Liana headed for the room exit, the boy was indignant that he couldn't accept his beloved marrying another, and asked her to stop. Liana posed a rhetorical question. What would she do if she didn't obey? And suggested ironically that he would shoot again. The young woman pointed out that if it were discovered that Lafitte had shot at the lord, the entire Felter family would disappear from the face of the earth. She clarified that a bloody storm would erupt in Naok, and recommended the ex-fiancé to flee. Instead of saying goodbye, the princess added that it was the only way to save Naok. And Lafitte did not let her leave, slamming the door shut. The princess was indignant at the boy's impertinence, and he asked her to answer a question. Did she love Lord Tibekan? Leif said that it is obvious that science is just a justification. He assumed that Liana is marrying because she has deep feelings for the lord and wishes to win back her ex-boyfriend. The girl laughed and said it was an incredibly foolish assumption. And the boy got truly angry and demanded an answer. Liana pushed the boy and affirmed that she did not think we would get to this. She said that breaking the relationship with Leif and marrying Lord Tibekan are equally strong blows. The girl remembered that science is the most important thing to her, so her ex-boyfriend should better leave her alone and allow her to leave. Leif shouted something at the retreating princess, but she walked through the castle hallway without reacting. Walking through the Felter family castle, Liana remembered her ex-boyfriend's question, and she pondered what she actually feels towards the lord. On one hand, she does not feel hatred towards the boyfriend. Quite the opposite, she promised to vehemently desire him. On the other hand, the proposal was accompanied by blood, which cannot give rise to special feelings. Upon approaching the guards, she decided to forget any thought of special feelings towards Lord Tibekan. She asked where Serviros was, but they replied they had no idea. The princess was indignant, saying that couldn't be, since she said goodbye to him in this place, and told him to wait. She repeatedly shouted the counselor's name, but without success. Then she realized she was left alone in this castle, and without escort. The princess declared she needed to leave the castle and demanded the guards open the gates. But they blocked the princess's path, crossing the walls, and said they had been ordered to guard those gates. She asked if that meant the guards would not let her leave, and they replied they were simply following orders. Liana was indignant to see that the guards apparently did not know who they had in front of them, and ordered them to move aside so she could open the gates herself. At that moment, Lyndon Felter approached her and asked what commotion the princess had caused in someone else's house. He emphasized that the poor and unfortunate girl was completely alone. And Liana asked what was happening here. The Grand Chancellor said he had thought a lot about the recent events, but he could not resign himself to them. Liana asked what it was about, and the Chancellor said he did not understand why the princess handed power to the barbarians, and not to the Felter family. Suddenly, the girl saw her excellent Milrad, and asked him what he was doing outside the temple. She assumed the priest had come to pray for the rest of the soldier victim. Lord Linden said that he was the one who invited him to celebrate the wedding ceremony. The girl asked who was getting married, and the Grand Chancellor said the answer was obvious. The man announced that today, the heiress of the Arzak family would swear love and fidelity as the wife of the son of Felter. Liana understood that it had been a mistake to come here secretly with few companions. The girl admitted to herself that she had expected dirty tricks from the Grand Chancellor. But this time he went too far. She asked if Lafitte agreed, and his uncle laughed, assuming the princess had forgotten that he was dead. The man solemnly announced that the princess would marry Loaf's cousin. He said the princess might not even know about Loaf's existence, since he is an illegitimate son. Linden explained that he had no choice but to bring him, since the eldest son of the Felter family is dead. He assured the princess she had no need to worry, since the boy looks exactly like his deceased cousin. The princess called him Lafitte, and affirmed that if his feelings were sincere, they should not help in the destruction of Naka. He replied that he did not understand what the princess was talking about, and asked her not to call him by a strange name. The protagonist tried to convince her former fiancé, calling him by his old name, but the young man did not react. He assured her that he would live his whole life in gratitude for having such a beautiful princess as a wife. The young man expressed the hope that Her Highness would accept him as a husband, but she shouted that their relationship was already over. He replied that everything could be easily arranged. He approached her face and murmured that she would finally be his wife. Liana pushed the annoyed Lord Felter, and affirmed that she would never marry him. The newly proclaimed fiancé grabbed her again. He covered her mouth with his hand and asked her to be quiet for a moment. Sir Linden Felter sighed in disgust, and asked His Excellency to start preparing for the ceremony. The young man affirmed that he himself would pronounce the oath on behalf of the princess, and asked the priest to start immediately. His Excellency, Milrad, said that the couple in love wanted to celebrate their marriage before the altar. Liana resisted. She shook herself free from her fiancé's tight grip. She even bit his hand until it bled. But he didn't let go. The moment the priest announced that the families of Arzak and Felter would now be under the protection of the Supreme Being, a crash was heard behind the door. His Excellency stopped and asked what was happening, but Linden ordered him to continue immediately. The priest began to speak about the vows of the lovers, but the crash did not cease, but rather intensified more and more. The Grand Chancellor ordered his soldiers to investigate the cause of the commotion. A voice forcefully demanded that they open the door, and a second later, the edge of a huge battle axe. The protagonist opened her eyes upon recognizing that the voice echoing behind the closed door sounded familiar. The young woman realized that only her fiancé could have such a powerful voice. And deep. Firmos declared that it seemed Lord Felter did not want to open up, and he suggested breaking down the door directly. Lord Tibakan agreed with his aide, and gave the order to destroy it. The princess, as if her heart felt him near, screamed his name incessantly. The crash did not cease, causing panic, commotion, and curses among all those present. Lafitte, hidden under another name, questioned his uncle if he really planned to receive the unwanted guests as enemies. The boy shouted that this was incorrect, and Linden replied that there was no time for discussions. He ordered the young man to hide immediately, since things would not improve if the unwanted guests saw his face. The Chancellor ordered the soldiers to take his nephew to a secret hiding place, while Lafitte resisted the guards. Linden told the princess that although she was an upstart, She was not foolish. He told her to decide whether to turn Nayak into a battlefield. Firmos informed his lord that the axe was no longer necessary, since the obstacle of the doors had been removed. He suggested that the Felter family did not want to fight, and that Lord Tibakan had opened the doors on his own. Upon the appearance of her fiancé, Liana shed tears in her eyes and realized that she was crying out of joy. The Grand Chancellor asked what the purpose of the visit to his castle was, and assumed it was urgent, since even the guests tried to force the doors. The man pointed out that the proper ones and polite people do not act like that. It is the behavior of barbarian beasts. The protagonist did not restrain herself and shouted at Linden to watch his words. Lord Tivican paid no attention to the insult and asked why Linden Felter had hidden like a rat in the mountain. The man was indignant, affirming that it should be no one's business what he did behind closed doors in his house. The lord approached and replied that it didn't matter if it was a house or a lair, but they shouldn't close the doors if his fiancée was there. The body of the Grand Chancellor was invaded by a strong savage tremor, so much so that his legs could not support his weight. Linden Felter fell to the ground by himself. His miserable and despicable appearance convinced Lord Tivakan not to dirty his hands and leave him alive. The young man approached his fiancée and confessed that he had come here only to take her away. He asked how Liana felt, if she was hurt, and she replied mentally that she was emotionally hurt, since she was trembling with rage. The girl said she had simply given the family notice of the heir's death, and that nothing more dangerous had happened. The lord suggested that if the princess had finished all her business, they could return home. Firmo was indignant at this decision and affirmed that it was well known that the Felter family was the richest lineage in Nok. The lord's aide commented that it would be nice to stay and have a cup of tea. He announced that Lord Tibakan himself had arrived at the Felter family castle, who would soon be co-ruler of Nok. Firmo said that the host should show hospitality towards the distinguished guests. Otherwise, everyone would think he has mental problems. Lord Felter was not happy with the aide's words, who noticed the priest and asked him what he was doing there, and not in church. The young man asked his lord that, since his holiness was present, why not discuss the details of the royal wedding? Liana told her fiancé that she wanted to postpone the conversation with the priest, since she was very tired that day. She asked her fiancé to go home together now, and she thought she didn't want any conversation at that moment. The lord pointed out that it was strange, and that the girl was definitely hiding something, but he didn't want to find out there. He mentally concluded that when Tibakan started investigating this situation, Nok would not fare well. The lord hugged the bride and promised to return home together, as she wished. He shouted at Firmos that he had stayed there and had received the welcome befitting Lord Tibakan. The lord also entrusted his subordinate with negotiating with His Holiness. Lord Tibakan told the bride that they could leave now. She deduced, for some reason, being close to the person she should hate and fear. The protagonist returned home with her fiancé to the castle on horseback and offered to hold the reins. The girl said she understood that the lord's injured shoulder might still hurt, but he replied that the wound didn't bother him. He was tormented by questions. Where did the blood on the princess's lips come from, if she really wasn't hurt? Liana replied that the blood had been accidentally stained, although it wasn't hers. The lord was surprised to hear such an answer. He didn't understand how one could accidentally stain their lips with blood, so he asked permission to see them. The lord remembered the expression of the bride in the Felter castle when opening the gates. He said he didn't believe her excuses and asked Her Highness to open her mouth slightly. When the girl complied with the request, he approached her lips and kissed her passionately. The boy finished the tender kiss and declared seriously that there was no wound at all. He said they could continue traveling, and the protagonist couldn't recover from such a romantic gesture. The lord wanted to know how the princess ended up alone in the mansion of the Felter family. The girl objected that it wasn't exactly like that, since Sir Vieros accompanied her. But he disappeared suddenly. Suddenly, a spark lit up the girl, and she realized that the counselor was not a man who could disappear without warning. Liana gasped. Surely that man is in trouble. Or he got into a trap. She confessed to her fiancé that Sir Vieros is one of the few subordinates she fully trusts. She decided she couldn't bear it if something bad happened to the counselor. The princess insisted on going faster. She had to send knights from home to rescue the man from an enemy castle. The lord replied that it was unnecessary, and with a wave of his hand, he summoned the accompanying guards. He instructed them to return and inform Firmos that they must find the commander of the Naka Guard. Liana thanked her fiancé. He said it was his duty to do so. He couldn't act otherwise. Then she leaned on his chest and understood why she felt so calm and safe with my lord. He listened and attended to the request. He checked her to see if she was injured and reassured her like a true enamored fiancé. A short time later, the princess asked Sir Maithlo to help her prepare a wedding gift for her fiancé. The man recalled that Lord Tibakan had promised to personally take care of the wedding preparations. Liana argued that the wedding gift for the fiancé was not an organizational matter. The man expressed doubts about whether it was necessary to show courtesy to the barbarians and give something to the fiancé for the wedding. Liana pointed out that she had already received her gift, so she couldn't fail to give him something in return. She said the bride's gift should be equivalent to his. Sir Maishaw said that the money in the gifted chest was no longer abundant. The girl was indignant. How was it possible if hardly any time had passed since they received it? The counselor recalled that according to the debt deed, all income belonged to Lord Felter, the biggest creditor of the royal family. The girl was in shock, and the man began to explain that. After the king's death, a terrible drought began. The crops had been infected with a disease. Liana asked him to stop recounting what she remembered perfectly. After the king's death, she was left practically alone. Only Madame Flambit was there, and Sir Veros nearby, while in the country people were starving. The terrible drought had dried up all the rivers. The situation was hell. But none of the most recognized families in the kingdom offered help. Only Lord Felter extended a hand and proposed a deal. But the conditions were so humiliating that the princess could not accept. She was looking for a way to save the kingdom from its desperate situation, even if it meant completely impoverishing the royal family. But no matter how much she tried, the new discouragement reached her again and again because of hunger and drought. The protagonist had no choice but to sign Sir Lyndon's contract and chain the royal family forever. Liana got angry. Why did Sir Maisho give away all the gold gifted to the Felter family without permission? He replied that he was just following the rules. And Liana guessed his motives, since it is safer to cling to a rich family. Her Highness understood that the man did it intentionally, so that they wouldn't spend all the money on the needs of the poor kingdom. Liana suspected that Sir Maisho even received a percentage, and asked, wasn't there a single cent left for a gift? The counselor said she could borrow money from Lord Felter. Of course, he doesn't approve of this marriage, but he is a generous person. The princess replied that it was unnecessary to do so, and that Sir Mello could leave. She began to cry upon realizing that she would look like a shameless woman to my lord, since she had spent a fortune on the wedding. But she can't even give a wedding gift, although she had already sold all her valuable possessions. And now she has nothing. Suddenly, a brilliant idea occurred to the girl. She could still give something to Lord Tibakan. That same night, Madame Flambeau and the princess went to the storage room and opened one of the drawers. The maid protested how dusty it was, and the girl commented that it was a relief that her late father's coronation suit was still preserved. She confessed to the nanny that she had already lost hope of finding a gift for the groom in honor of the wedding, since she had sold everything valuable she owned. Liana pointed out that with a little fixing, the king's suit could be used as a wedding gift. And the nanny added that even the embroidery was still intact. The girl replied that she would have to work so that the king's suit for the coronation would fit Lord Tibakin well. The nanny said that if the coat was washed and ironed, it would look like new. Liana expressed that she feared Madame Flambeau would get angry, since she was giving a family heirloom to someone unsuitable. The woman sighed heavily and concluded that her words, in any case, would not have influenced this wedding taking place. She said that, although inwardly the groom is a true barbarian to whom protocol is foreign, his appearance at the wedding should correspond to that of the princess. Her Highness pointed out that, strangely enough, those words made her want to cry. The nanny guaranteed that she did not want to sadden the lady. She replied that the moment simply turned out to be moving. Liana recognized that this conversation made her reflect on her relationship with Milord, since everything started on a wrong note. But during all the time they have known each other, he was never rude to the bride. And after the visit to the Felter house, he worried about her possible injury. The man she thought was her lover turned out to be a horrible being. The lord specially traveled to the Felter castle to pick up the princess, and she felt relief in her soul. Liana commented to the nanny that the groom only seems intimidating apparently, but in reality he is not. Madame Flambeau concluded that, in that case, Lord Tivikin deserves to wear those clothes. Secretly, the nanny said that my lord is quite attractive. Liana laughed. The woman added that a barbarian is not prohibited. She specified that she could take care of the suit as soon as she finished with the princess's mourning dress. The young woman pointed out that precisely for that moment, she would have taken the measurements, since she wants to be useful. Liana thought that she intentionally didn't tell Madame Flambeau anything about the events at the Felter house. Otherwise, she would faint. The princess entered my lord's room and asked if she could spare him a moment. Upon seeing him, the princess lost her words and stood motionless. The lord helped her regain composure, calling the bride by her name several times. He said he wanted to talk to the groom about the wedding suit. Then, the young man ordered his knights to leave immediately. The young woman mentally noted that she was again left alone with the lord, and he said he was listening attentively to his fiancée. The protagonist told the groom that she wants to prepare a groom's suit for him. Liana recognized that she knows this is not enough as a gift, but it's the best she can offer now. Milord asked the bride not to exaggerate, and Liana begged him not to worry, since she wasn't going to sew the suit from scratch. The princess explained that to make adjustments to the groom's suit, she needed to take measurements. The young woman asked the lord to raise his arms, since she would first take measurements of the upper body. She measured the wrists, the distance from the wrists to the elbows. But when trying to measure the width of the shoulders, she noticed a strong tremor. Liana realized that, precisely in that position, they had kissed for the first time. The young woman felt uncomfortable with the awkward silence and thought she should have asked Madame Flambeau to take the measurements. But she remembered she didn't want to be idle and announced that she was going to start. And the lord noticed that she was a little confused. The boy wanted to clarify if her movements were an indication that she was ready to fulfill the promise to passionately desire the groom. The young woman replied that it really didn't mean anything. She just wanted to take the measurements. Liana reflected that she felt strange. She was intrigued what my lord would do if it had really been a sign of preparation for passion. Her Highness measured the chest of her chosen one and asked him not to move. The princess thought that, no matter what she did, they would feel uncomfortable and tremble. The young woman realized that in the future, this would happen more than once. She couldn't hesitate constantly. Therefore, she had to get used to the lord. The princess announced she was going to measure the waist, and he grabbed her hand. The young man asked if it would be a problem if he moved, since he didn't want to stay still. The girl was surprised by the question and clarified what he wanted to move for and what to do. The lord replied that now there were so many options they could do together, and he ran his hand through the bride's hair. Liana replied that she was very busy preparing for the wedding ceremony. But the boy continued to stroke her gently. He asked if the princess couldn't dedicate a minute to her fiancé, and suddenly hugged her to kiss her. The Lord whispered that it had been a huge mistake to let the situation take its course, and moved towards Liana. She mentally concluded that she thought exactly the same, and even regretted the lost time. The princess interrupted the kiss and told the Lord they should stop, proposed counting to 3 to take a step back. But when she said the number 3, something happened. Firmos burst into the Lord's room and announced that he had returned and discovered interesting information. He saw that the Lord and the lady were facing like boxers in opposite corners of the ring. But he sensed an aura of passion. The Lord's personal assistant asked if he should come back later, but the princess protested. She assumed he should be outside the room, and that he was hindering the conversations of the Lord and his counselor. But Firmos said that, on the contrary, the girl should stay since the matter concerned her. He recalled that, precisely at Her Highness's request, Lord Tibacan's subordinates had been searching for Cerveros. Upon hearing that name, the princess bombarded Firmos with questions. Where was the counselor? How did he feel? And what had happened to him? The boy sadly concluded that Cerveros had disappeared. Liana asked if that meant the man was not in the Felter castle. He replied that it seemed so, since a person cannot disappear without a trace. There should be blood or other traces left. Firmos repeated that everything was clean, and according to the reaction of the mansion owner when investigating, he was hiding absolutely nothing. Liana suggested that, during the improvised ceremony, Lyndon Felter had locked his counselor in the dungeon. The Lord's aide affirmed that at first he thought the same, but the castle investigation indicated the opposite. The protagonist could not believe that Sir Burroughs had simply decided to leave, since he had been by her side for many years, watching her ups and downs. She wondered if there could be some reason he hadn't communicated to the royal family. Those thoughts made the princess's vision blur, and her legs give way. The Lord held her in time and asked her to sit down. Firmos said he understood her distress, but she shouldn't exaggerate. He added that fainting and nervousness could cause serious consequences. The young woman remembered that she had lied about her pregnancy. That measure would help preserve the sovereignty of Naka. That's why Her Highness decided not to give up and continue faking the pregnancy until the end. Firmus announced that he had good news. He reported that Sir Lyndon had arranged a gift in honor of the princess's wedding. A new bed would arrive soon, 2 chests of gold and 5 servants. Liana was surprised by the generosity of her sworn enemy. She thought a curse was expected from Lord Felter, but certainly not wedding gifts. Firmus boasted of having good persuasion skills. Sir Lyndon agreed to show courtesy and honesty. The young woman reflected that the present was several times more valuable than the groom's chest of gold, the one Sir Lyndon had brought. Pharaohs mentally noted the princess's reaction to the announcement and to the costly gift. Now it was clear to him why in the poor kingdom the only Felter family is the richest. The boy considered that the Lord's hard heart had softened precisely because of this, although the Lord is not inclined towards compassion. He added that the gift was not free. In return, Sir Lyndon asked to recognize the illegitimate son as a member of the Felter family. The young woman was dumbfounded, while the Lord attentively observed her reaction. Pharaohs clarified that she replied nothing, since it was the princess's decision. He said that was all he discovered during the visit to the Felters. The princess thanked him for his service and got ready to leave. Upon being left alone with the Lord, the counselor asked him what he planned to do with Her Highness. He assumed the Lord had already understood everything, since an illegitimate son appears when the eldest son dies. Pharaohs said it was evident that the princess had gone to the Felter castle to meet with her beloved. The boy affirmed that the Lord could not deny that the bride still thought fondly of the fight. The Lord replied that there was some truth in the counselor's words, but that didn't mean the princess was lying or conspiring against her future husband. The assistant asked the Lord if he would simply observe, and allow the fight to continue, pretending to be his second cousin. The Lord explained that the Felter family would be destroyed anyway, and in the meantime, they could set traps. He supposed that much profit could still be gained from that family, so he must try his best. Fermo smiled slyly, promising to squeeze everything possible out of them. And then, when the Lord ordered it, wipe them off the map. My Lord wondered if Liana had gone to the castle with her beloved, pretending to offer condolences. He couldn't understand where the blood on the princess's lips came from, since that was what prompted the romantic inspection. My Lord wondered why Liana didn't refuse the kiss to check for wounds, and tried to accept it as she had promised. Perhaps the princess had prepared such subtle reactions to deceive him. The Lord remembered her trembling fingers, the slight blush in her eyes full of passion and desire. He had used torture hundreds of times to obtain the truth, so he knew the body never lies. However, doubts tormented him. Perhaps the princess had prepared such subtle reactions to deceive him. The princess announced that the captain of the guard, Serviros, had disappeared, and ordered the knights to search for him. He remembered Fermos's words, that surely the counselor had left alone, and wondered if his sudden disappearance had a reason. The young woman wondered if he would ever return. And if he didn't, who could she trust in that castle? Madame Flambit knocked on Her Highness's room and announced that she was bringing sewing materials, a wedding dress and a gown. She added that she had sewn some parts of the dress and added a collar to it, so now it looks more like a morning dress. Liana thanked the nanny for the effort and work and said she had already taken some measurements. The woman started comparing them with the wedding dress and was horrified to see how much she would have to redo. She was indignant at how my lord, with his broad shoulders, managed to find suitable clothes. Madame Flambeau asked the lady if she had taken the measurements correctly. Liana could not give any coherent answer because she remembered how nervous and shaky she had been at that moment. Madame Flambeau pointed out that she had never seen such figures. She supposed it must be nice to sink into the arms of a man with such broad shoulders. The maid blushed like a tomato. She got confused and asked the lady to pretend she hadn't heard anything. The princess smiled and concluded that it was a reaction because the nanny had been working with expensive clothes for a long time. The woman was glad that the lady was understanding and announced that the caftan would need the cape trimmed and fabric added to the collar and shoulders. She got encouraged and suggested adding a belt to the suit and equal fabric on the trouser legs. Liana agreed and admitted that the nanny had the best sewing skills. That's why she enjoyed working on a quality suit. Madame Flambeau asked what the length of the trouser legs should be, and the princess was speechless again. But in the end, she managed to admit that she hadn't measured my lord's leg length. The woman was indignant. How could she forget to take these measurements? What if the trousers turn out short? Liana admitted internally that after the Lord's kiss, she hadn't been able to think about the measurements, since she was fascinated by him. Mrs. Flambit said they should measure again, since there was a risk that the wedding dress wouldn't fit them well. Liana doubted she could do it. The nanny wondered if the lady didn't want to face my lord again. She said she couldn't stand the sad look of the princess, and suggested taking the measurements herself. Liana tried to stop the nanny, and insisted that it wasn't due to distrust of the fiancé. The woman remained firm in her decision, and promised the lady that she would return soon. Liana pondered. Perhaps it was hard to believe she didn't hate the fiancé, but she felt something strange towards him. Suddenly, the princess was called by Mrs. Flambit, who mentioned that she hadn't found the lord since he had left. For some reason, the lady sighed with relief and smiled, and the nanny unexpectedly asked how many days were left until the wedding. Liana replied that the marriage would take place in 10 days. 10 days after tomorrow's funeral. The nanny asked if that date coincided with her menstrual cycle. Upon hearing the unexpected question, the young woman pricked her finger with the needle. The nanny said she should take care of it immediately. Liana protested angrily, but it wasn't because of the wound. But because she realized she couldn't hide for much longer, Mrs. Flambit commented that she didn't understand politics. So she didn't know if lying to the Lord about her pregnancy was mandatory. Her Highness explained that it was necessary to prevent the power over science from completely falling into the hands of Lord Tibakan. The princess asked if it was possible to hide the pregnancy, and the nanny replied that it would only be possible if the spouses slept in separate rooms. She remembered that on the first wedding night, it was necessary to follow special traditions. Liana mentally concluded that the only way out would be not to spend the first wedding night together. But the barbarian husband would not accept this. She decided to invent an excuse related to the pregnancy. But that barbarian possibly wouldn't stop at anything. Suddenly, Madame Flambit jumped to her feet upon hearing a knock on the door. She supposed the Lord had returned. The nanny advised the princess to tidy up while she opened the door. A shrill female scream was heard. Liana turned and saw the few. She affirmed that she had overheard the conversation and wanted to know if Liana was really carrying a child inside her. The young woman shouted that the boy was crazy to come here. Since Lord Tibakan would find out everything, she demanded he leave immediately. He declared he wouldn't move until he heard the answer to his question. Whose child was it? Liana was indignant that he himself should know better than anyone. But the ex-fiancé retorted that he didn't know the truth, since he hadn't been present for the last 2 weeks. At that moment, Madame Flambit definitively verified that Lord Felt was alive. The princess ordered her to go rest. The few shouted that she needed a direct explanation from the princess. Then she understood that she was only seeking confirmation. She wanted to know if the princess had told the barbarian and the savage that the few had been her first man, and that now she belonged to him. The girl replied that it wasn't so. It was just a lie to avoid the marriage promise. This dialogue bored Her Highness, and they firmly decided that they would marry Lord Tibakana and have a child. This child will inherit the surname of the Arzak family, and in the future will be the legitimate ruler of Naka. Lafitte recalled that minutes before, Liana had admitted that she was lying. He supposed that even if it were true, did she believe a savage would let the son of another live? The princess explained that she had signed a marriage contract with the Lord, in which everything was detailed. Lafitte shouted that if she believed in a piece of paper, that could be torn at any moment. The ex-lover's conversation was overheard by Madame Flambit, who trembled when the ex-fiancé recalled that the Lord had come to Naka for revenge. She asked Lafitte not to insist that the rumors were true, because she knew the truth. The Lord had no interest in signing a contract. He could destroy the gates, take the castle, and kill all the guards. He could drag the princess to the priest, and then she would immediately be the wife of Lord Tibakana. Upon seeing the bite mark on her ex-fiancé's hand, she remembered how he had held her tightly to force her to marry. Liana understood that Lafitte had acted like a barbarian, while Lord Tibakana had always treated his fiancée gently. The princess declared that she was no longer his fiancée, but his lady, and ordered him to leave the castle immediately. Lafitte tried to protest how the princess could say that, but was interrupted by a maid who burst in announcing that the Lord had returned. Liana shouted at her ex-boyfriend that he must hide immediately, and pushed him towards the balcony. Lafitte refused and said he wasn't going to flee like a despicable coward, while the princess asked him not to make noise. Otherwise, she couldn't save him. She explained that his grace had reached the limit. The boy had to choose to sit silently like a mouse, or be torn apart like a dog. Madame Flambit, with a trembling voice, informed the lady that Lord Tibakan was already approaching the chambers. She asked the bride what was happening, since she had been notified that he had an important matter with her. The young woman explained that it wasn't urgent. Simply, while arranging the clothes, she realized that more measurements needed to be taken. The princess asked if the Lord could take care of it with her. He clarified whether the reason for calling him to the castle was only the measurements. With an annoyed expression, the Lord asked the bride to start. Then she shouted at the nanny that she would take the measurements herself. Approaching the groom, Liana perceived a faint smell of sweat and asked if he had rushed so much to get to the castle. The lord admitted that he thought Liana had an important matter with him. The young woman mentally noted this strange behavior. She concluded that he missed the girl intensely. That's why he rushed so much, just to see his chosen one. The princess started to apologize, saying that it was an important matter for the Tibecan house, since without measurements, the clothes couldn't be trimmed. The boy admitted that if he had known the bride called him only for measurements, he wouldn't have rushed so much. The lord supposed Liana avoided him because of the unpleasant smell. The young woman rejected it, saying it wasn't that bad. She said she perceived a strong body odor, like that of meat, and she even liked it. The girl asked him to let her go, since she needed to take the measurements. But my lord couldn't and begged her for a few more seconds. The princess became alarmed and wondered what was happening. He replied that he had been very restless because of a message. The lord mentioned that he had been informed about the visit of the illegitimate son of the Felter family, Lots, to the palace. He added that he then received a message about the princess's search for my lord. By connecting both facts, he understood that something had happened. The lord asked the bride again if it was true that she had called him only for measurements. The girl wondered why my lord didn't trust her motive. Did he suspect something, or did he already know and was testing her? Liana thought the groom's question was intentional. Perhaps he was trying to get her to confess everything before he opened the window. The protagonist understood that. In any case, she had to save Lafta somehow, since he couldn't be there for much longer. She imagined the terrible consequences if the ex-boyfriend lost his balance and fell, or if someone saw him from the street. The girl told the lord that she had indeed called him for measurements, but she couldn't do it alone in that room. She explained that Madame Flambit was there, and she couldn't order her to leave, since the place had all the sewing materials. Liana proposed going to the adjoining room. My lord accepted and commented that he was intrigued by the turn of events. The man added that he didn't know how taking measurements in another room would end. The girl didn't understand what he meant. As soon as the door closed, the lord lunged at the bride and leaned her against the wall, kissing her passionately. A few seconds later, he hugged his beloved by the waist. He lifted her and rested his lips on her neck. But the girl asked him to stop. Then the lord asked her if this position made her uncomfortable, or if she didn't like it. The protagonist confessed that she was a little scared, so he lowered her to the floor and considered that he had rushed too much. The lord noticed that the girl was sad. He leaned down, looked her in the eyes, and asked her if everything was all right. The grooms looked greatly bothered Liana, who, out of fear, covered her eyes with her hands. The princess asked why the boy was looking at her like that, and he explained that it was evident from her expression that something was not right. The girl reflected that she had acted strangely, without reason. Even though it wasn't the first time she had kissed the lord, she promised to remove her hands if he stopped looking at her so much. And he replied that if that was the problem, he wouldn't do it anymore. He admitted that he liked feeling the princess's touch on his eyes, which meant she was no longer avoiding him. He said that's why he would forgive the bride today and turn a blind eye to the fact that the Felter's illegitimate son was hidden in the next room. Liana concluded that it made sense, since the lord was responsible for the castle's security. So logically, they would have informed him that someone had entered. She picked up the tape measure from the floor and suggested getting back to work, asking her what exactly the girl needed to measure. Furtos replied with a disapproving voice that he had followed the lord's order. The lord asked him why he was unhappy, and he replied that he had considered it a magnificent opportunity to eliminate the Felter family. The subordinate mentally noted that he had never before seen the leader so unable to control his facial expression. He recalled that it all started when they learned that a rat from the Felter family had entered the Arzak castle. The lord's face froze when it turned out that the rat was heading for the princess's bedroom. Firmo concluded that he did not understand the princess. How could she bring her lover into her own room while having a fiancé? He thought that after this incident, the Lord's kindness towards the lady would end. But it wasn't so. Firmo couldn't understand if the lady was lucky or smart, and if her innocent expression on her beautiful face was always real or a mask. Firmo reported that the rat returned unharmed and safely to its burrow, and that its head was still in place. He added that the mouse ran around the castle as if it didn't value its life. And from its behavior, it was clear that it did not want to let go of the princess. His aide asked the Lord if he was really going to ignore what happened just like that. He replied that on this occasion it would be so. And the aide affirmed that he did not understand the Lord's decision. Firmo clarified that the problem wasn't just that the bride was deceiving him, but that her lover was connected to the Shark Kingdom. He said that the Lord knew perfectly well that the Felter family could not be ignored. So why had he made such a decision? The Lord replied that they had been paid, and the aide deduced that it could only have been the Knight Linden Felter. Firmo considered it a logical deduction, since he was the richest man in the kingdom. Although somewhat greedy, the Lord explained that it was the princess who paid. And the aide was surprised, asking if both were talking about that penniless girl. Firmo was surprised that the Lord was willing to turn a blind eye, when normally he would shed blood without fail. The Lord smiled, remembering how important that reward had been. The assistant warned that, if the Lord continued to be soft, everything would repeat, but the Lord rejected it and swore it would not happen again. The Lord assured that he had discovered this by checking that the princess did not call her lover. He added that her head wasn't just for decoration, and that she would never call her lover and fiancé at the same time. The assistant considered it a logical deduction. But if the princess was truly innocent, that didn't mean they would always forgive her. The Lord admitted that before he only saw her as a beautiful prize for winning the kingdom. He speculated that Lyanna and Lafitte had been lovers for some time, so they couldn't cut off their feelings just like that. What's more, the princess's secret lover was also the biological father of her child. He realized that his fiancé was desperately trying to hide her lover, since she consented to seduce the fiancé, something very unusual for her. Then the Lord gave in to passion and lost his mind because beyond the legacy and the benefits, he wanted that girl for herself. He decided he would take everything back, including the heart stolen by the eldest son of the Felter family. Firmo rejoiced that the old evil lord had returned, and everything would be as before. He affirmed that if the Lord expressed his real desire, he would take it seriously and do everything to protect the princess. He swore that Rat would never get a second chance. At night, Lyanna tossed and turned in bed trying to sleep. But she couldn't, since thoughts about the funerals tortured her. She had promised herself this before. That's why she was worried about the incident of hiding her ex in the castle. The girl couldn't understand why the Lord pretended not to know anything, even though he knew everything. This looks like betrayal on the part of the fiancé. A mistake like that cannot be ignored just like that. The princess wondered if Milord was playing with her, or if he would really turn a blind eye this time. She was interested to know if this meant she had become important to Milord. The princess decided to fetch water herself to wash, since the servants were still sleeping. And while going down to the well, she reflected on the Lord. Lyanna concluded that the fiancé had decided to mock her, since no one in their right mind would overlook everything for a few touches. Obviously, Lord Tivaken, who besieged the castle and proposed with the blood of many knights, was not capable of that. When the princess approached the well, a male voice called her. It was Hyde, Squire Viros's squire. He asked her not to be scared, since he had been waiting for a long time for someone to bring water for the princess to wash. She asked Hyde what he was doing there at that hour. He explained that he had been entrusted to deliver a message to the princess in secret. The boy admitted that the message had been sent by Knight Viros. Then the princess bombarded him with questions about the counselor's condition. Hyde regretfully pointed out that he didn't know anything. only that he had abandoned Nock. The boy pointed out that he had little time and asked her to listen carefully to what Knight Viros had asked him to convey. Hyde whispered that the counselor had said not to trust him, since his goal was revenge. The girl was shocked, and Hyde added that the man had said she should understand everything. The protagonist wondered if Sir Barras had heard Lafitte say that Lord Tibacon's revenge led to Naok. It turns out that the man, through a message, advised to remain vigilant and postpone the wedding until his return with the mysteries unveiled. In her room, Liana kept thinking why the counselor suddenly left without telling anyone. The protagonist supposed that the subordinate believed Lafitte's words. Too bad she didn't then, and attributed it to jealousy. The girl couldn't believe Silveros's words were true. But then, why didn't Lord satisfy his thirst for revenge with beheading? He probably wants a crueler ending. And painful for Nock. He wants to wipe it off the face of the earth. Liana guessed that all the gentle touches and kisses were a trap to disorient her and make her lose clarity. The next morning, the protagonist spent it in reflections. But the flow of thoughts about the Lord was interrupted by the nanny's tender voice. The woman was upset to see the lady biting her nails. Like a small child, she pointed out the horrible state of the nails and said they could be fixed with a few precise cuts with the nail scissors. The young woman ordered the nanny to do what she deemed best, since no one cared about nails. But Madame Flambit replied that it wasn't about the nails, but about the hands. She affirmed that the hands that governed an entire kingdom must be beautiful and well cared for. Liana was bored by the improvised manicure, so she sharply pulled her finger from the maid's hands, saying that it was enough. Suddenly, the protagonist's finger twitched with sharp pain, and a few drops of blood fell on the dress. Madame Flambit lamented that the cut was deep and blamed herself, but the princess assured that it didn't hurt that much. She remembered that they had to continue preparing, since the funeral would be soon. But the nurse pointed out that at least the blood would stop. The maid promised to return soon with an antiseptic for the finger, and Liana plunged back into her reflections. Her injured finger hurt strongly, and the pain, along with the thoughts, led her to consider the Lord who wanted to avenge science. She didn't know what to do, since the sweetness and the fiancé's affection were just a farce to obtain the kingdom. Meanwhile, the funeral procession was ready to leave. The nanny told Her Highness that, although she had already fixed the dress, there was still a problem. Liana asked excitedly what was happening, and Mrs. Flambard clarified that the princess was still beautiful, and that couldn't be fixed. The maid protested that they shouldn't say such things on a burial day. The nurse objected that the barbarian's savage look was worrying. The maid advised the lady to be careful, and Liana addressed Lord Tivakin. She realized that Mrs. Flambard was flattering her because Milord looked better in black clothes than she did. The young man pointed out that the princess's morning dress had changed. She replied that the nanny had modified it. She said the dress suited the bride very well, and suggested getting on horseback, since they had to go together. The girl concluded that it was a bad idea. She remembered how the previous ride together had ended. Liana announced she would go separately, since she had her own mare. The milord objected that it would be safer that way. It was unknown where new arrows might come from. He assured her that he would react faster if the bride went with him. So she agreed. The lord lifted Her Highness with a smooth movement and sat her on the croup, and she was surprised, since the groom had injured his shoulder recently. Liana worried that the wounds probably hadn't healed yet. No matter how strong Milord was, it surely hurt him. They began the journey, and the princess wondered how strange it was that all things went well for the Lord, whether riding a horse or kissing. But Liana remembered what Hyde had said, and decided not to get distracted or lose vigilance. Upon approaching the temple, the Lord extended his hands to the bride and suggested she get down. The young woman mentally noted that she would very likely forget how to dismount. Although he was quite tall, a wide step led to the temple. That difficult path was part of the worship of God. The princess and the lord began to climb the stairs. But a priest and his deacons blocked their way. The young woman was surprised that the priests had come down, since they normally wouldn't come, as it was an arduous path. The chief priest announced that he was conveying the words of His Eminence to the heiress of Arzak, which prohibited her from attending those funerals. He added that as long as the princess was with someone acting against divine will, she could not set foot in the temple. Liana asked if His Eminence was referring to her fiancé. She said it was ridiculous. It was surely Sir Lyndon Felter's words. Not from the clergy. The young woman deduced that they were trying to isolate Denaka, and demanded that the path to the kingdom's ruler be opened immediately. The priest replied that there were no monarchs among the clergy, except God, so he was only following the primate's orders. The princess demanded to speak personally with the primate, but the man rejected the request, explaining that he was busy with the funerals. He added that there was a way to lift the veto if the princess broke off the engagement and abandoned the one who had rejected God, in order to be accepted into the temple again. Liana understood that if she left now, rumors would circulate in society that the science princess had been bewitched by a barbarian and had abandoned God. It would surely serve as an excellent pretext to remove the disobedient monarch from power. Her Highness declared that if the primate did not want to descend, and was hiding like a coward in the temple, she herself would go up to see him. The priests were indignant, considering that God would not tolerate such rudeness, and demanded piety, but the Lord stopped his fiancée. He explained that they should not advance, since his goal had been to provoke the princess and make her go up. My lord believed the primate had a plan, and advised not to go up if he didn't know what awaited her up there. Liana decided the fiancé was right. She turned around and heard the heartbroken cry of a priest, a sign that there was certainly a trap upstairs. It turns out Lord Felter plans to openly ignore the royal family, a decision reminiscent of a declaration of war. When the castle was besieged, it was obvious that the enemy of science was Lord Tibakan. But now Liana found it difficult to understand who had malicious intentions. Absorbed in her thoughts, Liana didn't notice where she was stepping, and she stumbled. But the Lord managed to hold her in time. The young woman thanked him and reflected. Was the Lord a friend or an enemy? If he always showed interest and care towards her. But what worried the princess most was why her fiancé was so kind to her. Wouldn't it be a form of revenge? At the top of the stairs, Lord Lyndon, along with his son, shouted that this could not be possible. He was surprised. Was this barbarian perhaps smart enough to realize that some trap was set? Lord Lyndon complained that that damned demon, Lord Tibakan, had managed to guess something. Apparently, he was not lacking in intelligence. Lafitte told his uncle that it was better the trap hadn't worked. If the princess had been injured, this would have become a public issue. In the end, the Felter family might have been expelled from Naka. Sir Lyndon sighed, annoyed, and commented that they had lost a great opportunity to kill the barbarian leader. The young man pointed out that the people of Naka love her deeply, so if she had died, they wouldn't have been able to prevent an uprising. The uncle asked his nephew if he still had feelings for that fallen woman, since he defends her so much. Lafitte asked his uncle to watch his language, since he doesn't even imagine what she did for her ex-lover. The man remained insecure on the ledge, and could fall at any moment. The whisper of Lion urging Lord Tibakan to go to another room arrived. Lafitte understood that those words had been spoken especially so he could escape. It turns out that the princess exposed herself to danger to save the life of her former fiancé. It is evident that due to her nobility, Her Highness cannot confess her love to another man while she is engaged. This act meant that hope still existed. Feelings could be rekindled, and Liana had only fallen under the influence of the authoritarian lord. The chancellor said his head already hurt from so much nonsense. It seems the nephew has completely lost his vision. The young man replied that, on the contrary, only now had he had a revelation. Lord Linden wondered what that madman would do when the princess married a barbarian. According to the young man, in that case, the Felter family would have no choice but to bite their elbows, regret deeply. The man laughed and remembered that there were 10 days left until the wedding. Lafitte assured that he would not allow it. At any cost, Lord Tivikin and Liana galloped back to the castle. The young man noticed a recent cut on the protagonist's hand and asked what happened. The girl explained that it was nothing serious. She just got a little distracted while holding the scissors in her hand. The young man assured that it was necessary to change the scissors. Liana thought she couldn't afford to change things like manicure scissors. By then, the main characters had returned to the Arzak Palace. The princess thanked my lord for the ride and said it was time to go. The lord hesitated for a few seconds. Then he lunged and managed to reach Liana. He asked her how important it was for her not to have been able to attend the funeral. Then he supposed it must be a big problem. The girl replied that it was so. The people will be deeply disappointed in a monarch who ignores the memory of fallen soldiers who gave their lives for him. She said that nothing good would happen after this, and that the Grand Chancellor would not forget it. He will surely take advantage of it to harm the princess and isolate her from power. The fiancé affirmed that he would solve the problem himself. The girl was shocked, and she already imagined how Lord Tibakan would punish Sir Lindo. Her face contorted with fear. The young man noticed it and clarified that he didn't plan to use weapons to solve the matter. Liana sighed with relief and asked how my lord planned to solve it. The lord replied that he didn't know yet. That's why he said goodbye until the next day. But the princess stopped him with a question. She asked with a sad voice why such a powerful lord and majestic worried about the funerals of common soldiers. He asked why she shouldn't care. The young man clarified that from now on, his fiancée's worries automatically become his own as well. Moreover, they are now personally responsible for Liana's safety, thus protecting her from stress and problems. Liana asked, are there no other reasons? That is, does the Lord act this way because of the long engagement relationship without any other cause? Lord Tibakan murmured quietly that apparently they were still too far apart from each other. Then he asked if the lady would more easily accept his help if he mentioned an important reason. He affirmed that, then, the princess should consider that he has hidden intentions. Moreover, now he wants Miss Liana to compensate him for solving the burial problem. The protagonist asked the suitor what he wants to receive. Then she reminded him that the situation in the kingdom is not the best, so it is unlikely that she can give much. The lord replied that he will take what the princess can give him, and asked her to change her room. He decided, in his right as a suitor, to occupy a room located next to the bride's. The kingdom's rulers lived in the adjoining rooms, connected by a shared bathroom. Practically, these rooms form a single unit. The protagonist was surprised to realize that she would share a room with her suitor, dividing every moment and detail of her private life. The young man saw Liana's astonished look and asked if it was really a difficult request. The girl replied that Lord Tibakan could use it after the wedding. He answered that under those circumstances, it didn't look like payment. Liana, with a displeased tone, declared that, as things had happened this way, she would allow the fiancé to move there, but on the condition that he really helped solve the funeral problem. And not a single drop of blood was spilled. The boy said goodbye to the bride, promising to see her the next day. Since he had no intention of postponing the move, he took Liana's hand, brought it close to his face, and gently brushed his lips over the wound on her index finger. The protagonist's entire body trembled. In the end, my lord begged the princess to take care of her hands, while she reflected whether she had acted correctly. Although it is difficult to imagine that Lord Tibakan does not achieve something, or fail in some endeavor. However, the protagonist was intrigued to know what measures my lord would take to solve the funeral problem. Liana, as well as our dear spectators, can only speculate and wait for news from the lord. Meanwhile, they will remain in uncertainty. Cerberus's report began by informing about the incidents in the temple during the funeral preparations. He told the lady that at first the chain holding the bell broke. Although the priests took care of it every day, Her Highness feigned surprise. The subordinate continued narrating, clarifying that they managed to hang the bell somehow. The supreme priest performed the rite of consecrating the earth, which would cover the graves. It only remained to move the coffins to the cemetery and bury them, but they did not succeed. A huge rock fragment fell from the sky. It rolled and destroyed the staircase leading to the temple. Hard to believe, but witnesses confirm it. Now the priests are trapped inside the temple, since that staircase was the only way down. Until the staircase is repaired, the funerals cannot be held, and the sad event is postponed. Everyone wonders if the supreme priest committed some sacrilegious offense, provoking divine wrath and bringing disasters. The princess listened with bated breath, formulating only precise questions. The counselor added that many priests consider that assumption absurd. But it happened on the same day as the funerals. He posed a rhetorical question. Doesn't all this look like the anger of the Almighty? Although some claim that it happened because Her Highness, Princess Liana, could not attend the funerals, the protagonist could barely hide her smile, thinking how such an idea had come to Lord Tibacan's mind. She wondered if the groom was crazy enough to even hire a wizard. Cerveros, stunned and timidly, pointed out that the princess seemed pleased, despite divine wrath. The girl was especially amused that people directly accused the supreme priest of everything. The lady asked the counselor why no one supposed that God was angry because of her. It was precisely the senior priest who didn't let her enter the temple for the funerals. The man replied that there were rumors of that, but he didn't believe them, so he didn't even dare mention it. The princess said it was true, so it could be publicly announced that God was angry for a just cause. She ordered that at dawn the next day, in the divine square, the Naka guard should read the decree about this incident. Cerveros wished her a peaceful night and left while the protagonist, upon being left alone, began to reflect. How wonderful that today she stayed working late, thanks to which she learned great news. She wondered when she had felt so happy last. It was very recently, even before Lord Tibacan captured the castle. Then she didn't even mention the term good news. It turns out that Lord Tibacan became the person who, for the first time in a long time, brought good news to the princess. In any case, the heroine was happy that the date of the funerals had been changed. The princess found it difficult to accept that she wouldn't manage to speak to or comfort the relatives and loved ones of the deceased soldiers. Suddenly, Liana heard a knock on the door, and she couldn't understand who dared to bother her at such a late hour. The young woman deduced that Lord Tibacan had arrived. Probably many spectators had also noticed it. None of you were mistaken. Behind the door, indeed, was the protagonist's fiancé. Although he wore dusty clothes and dirty, he probably hadn't changed since his arrival at the temple. The Lord asked if he could enter, but Liana remained speechless with astonishment. So the man decided not to wait for permission and entered. Liana inquired why he had come at that hour, and the young man explained that he wanted to announce that the problem with the funerals was resolved. He added that the senior priest would contact the princess tomorrow, and begged not to believe his words about the intervention, since there was no proof that Lord Tibacan was involved. Liana nodded obediently. Lord continued saying that some minor damage had now arisen in the temple. The princess pointed out that she was already aware. The young man assured that he would cover all expenses himself, so the bride shouldn't worry about that. Then he paused and murmured discontentedly that everything was turning out too brief, although Liana didn't understand at all what he was talking about. Lord affirmed that, before coming here, he had been busy with the cliff. That took him practically a whole day. The girl understood that by the cliff. The Lord referred to the rock on which the temple stands. Perhaps he climbed that rock and damaged the bell. After distracting attention, he probably moved the rock that destroyed the staircase. Now it was clear to the protagonist why the fiancé was covered in mud. It turns out he sweated and worked hard all day for his fiancée. The Lord was saddened that he had done so much today, and nevertheless told everything briefly. She asked if the new room could be occupied now. Liana replied that it was too rushed. Lord Tevikin approached the princess and asked if she allowed him to touch her. He gently stroked her chin, but the protagonist instantly stepped back. Milord understood that the young woman didn't want to be touched with dirty hands. Liana noticed a wound on the Lord's hand and supposed he got it on the rock, but Milord said he didn't remember. Then he insisted that she let him into the room with her, since the wound needed to be treated. The Milord said he wouldn't move from there until he received an answer on whether the adjoining room could be occupied. Liana complained that Lord Tibakan was so stubborn, and with a displeased expression. She replied that yes. She added that she hoped the fiancé was satisfied now. But he posed the next question. Did she allow him to touch his fiancé? But of course, after washing his hands. The girl replied that the treatment had to be finished first. Liana did not expect at all that the good news that cheered her up would turn out to be so difficult. Milord got completely dirty and hurt his hands to please his fiancé. Liana didn't understand how to define what the suitor was doing for her, even if he came for revenge. But somehow the princess felt that next to Lord Tibakan, she would feel calm and safe. These ideas scared the princess, since they should not exist in a ruler of Naka. Liana dipped a cloth to clean the Lord's hands of dirt and dust before the bandage. Now she guessed that the fiancé simply didn't see the wound, since his hands are large. But the protagonist decided to confirm it and ask the Lord the cause. She asked how it was possible not to notice the wound. Did it not hurt at all? The young man replied that, apparently, he was so busy and rushed that he didn't pay attention. So the treatment, the ointment, and the bandage will help, since the wound doesn't seem that serious. The girl asked him to come closer so she could clean the dirt from his face. She became interested, so close enough. The girl wondered if it was because of the light on my lord's face, or if he was really incredibly handsome. Once again, my lord had the same fiery gaze as before. But the protagonist understood that if she kept looking at him like that, things would not end well. And so it was. The princess and Lord Tivakin melted into a tender kiss. Liana thought she heard her name. She blinked several times and saw the Lord's surprised face. She noticed she was absorbed and not responding. Then he asked if everything was all right with the princess. She mentally scolded herself for imagining nonsense. Then she complained to the fiancé that he was too close. The young man moved a little, but nothing changed. It was still uncomfortable. So she decided to act fast. Liana thought she shouldn't have proposed washing her face with her own hands. Maybe asking the fiancé to move further away. No, it wasn't worth saying. It was probably the candles. They lit his face in such a way that he looked very attractive. The girl said she was still uncomfortable with the fiancé's proximity and asked him to close his eyes. The young man commented that it was a strange request. Liana mentally noted that she had asked so that the Lord wouldn't see her emotions, because nothing was hidden at that distance. So the Lord affirmed that he wouldn't, because he didn't want to. The protagonist was surprised. First, she thought she was mistaken and asked him for clarification. The girl protested mentally why the Lord suddenly became so stubborn, and if the water got into his eyes. Suddenly, blood began to flow from his lordship's forehead, and Liana shouted in surprise. The young man assured her that everything was fine, that he already knew about that wound. But it wasn't bleeding, so she wasn't distracted by treating it. The girl said it was her fault, because sometimes the face was too enthusiastic. But his lordship protested and asked her to continue, because it didn't hurt him at all. Liana affirmed that there was no question of continuing. The head wound had to be washed. The girl thought it was crazy. Why hadn't he dealt with his wounds first and come directly to her room? He affirmed that he had almost finished. However, just then the light went out, The boy said that it was even good. The girl was surprised what could be good about it. His lordship declared happily that now he could finally touch his fiancée. He reminded her that the princess had allowed him to approach her only after washing off the dust and the dirt. Liana mentally felt strange. Although it wasn't the first time her fiancé had hugged her, the protagonist concluded that it was because of the sudden extinguishing of the candle. Because in the dark people act strangely. So she decided to ask the fiancé why he had this obsessive idea of touching her. The young man said that perhaps it would sound strange. But while crawling on the rack, a stone fell on his head. After the blow, the Lord thought that death could come suddenly. He didn't even manage to touch the bride. The boy added that he understood it was a strange reason. It's just that it was the first time he had thought of it. After feeling pain, Liana asked why my lord climbed that rock. Even though the path turned out to be so difficult, the Lord said the princess should no longer worry, since he did not suffer serious injuries and feels fine. The girl replied that in any case it was not worth risking so much, although she noted internally that the fiancé's hair was soft. Although at first glance it looked harder, Liana couldn't believe someone had taken such a risky action for her. In reality, this dark-haired man is not at all as cold and cruel as he seems at first glance. The protagonist concluded that perhaps many things in life are different from how we imagine them. This probably also applies to rumors. Milord said that it was different from what he imagined. Liana asked to clarify what it was about. He explained that he supposed the girl would just remain still and endure his caresses. But he never imagined that she would also touch the groom's body in return. That's why he is even happy to have suffered. The next day, the princess received the priests in her office. She asked angrily if they had really lost their minds, asking for such a thing. The senior priest calmly repeated that Her Highness needed to postpone the wedding. Then he affirmed it loudly, saying that it was required because God was angry. Liana laughed, mentally seeing that the priests also believed rumors. It seems the reading of the decree bore fruit, since as soon as dawn broke, the man ran here and started shouting. The priest affirmed that an impious man was walking the earth. But the protagonist said that to her, it seemed that it had nothing to do with it. She asked if the princess really denied God's words, and she replied that she only followed what she heard. Everyone knows that the Creator got angry because His Highness did not attend the funerals. It was the senior priest himself who denied her participation. Therefore, his guilt lies in God's wrath. The man shouted, "Who dares to say such a thing?" They say they lowered the priest with a rope. It seems he vomited not only the contents of his stomach, but also his last rational thoughts. The protagonist felt incredibly tired and exhausted, probably because she hadn't slept much today. She stayed with Lord Tivikin in the bathroom until late at night. And now it seems she still felt how soft his hair was. She seemed to feel right now how the strong ones were hugging her. But at the same time, the fiancé's tender hands. The princess did not hear at all what the priest was babbling. She was flying in her own thoughts about Lord Tibican. She kept thinking that Milord was the first person in her life with whom time flew by. The priest finally approached the princess and asked if she was listening to him. But Liana, with a stern voice, begged her interlocutor to be clear about what he wanted from her. The man affirmed that he demanded that the princess postpone her marriage to Lord Tibican. And she asked why suddenly. He said that this union was impossible until the Lord purified the sins of the barbarians, since disobeying gods would bring terrible revenge. The young woman sighed with relief. They had finally reached the key point. The man insisted that she must understand how unbreakable the Lord's will was. The essence was to repair the staircase, and Sir Lyndon would probably refuse to allocate resources for it. Although the priest seemed determined, and surely the Grand Chancellor had done everything possible to annul the marriage. Liana asked if the priest had directly received a message from God. Did he simply appear in a dream and order the bond to be destroyed? The man was indignant at speaking with such contempt for God. Now it was clear that the tests of Naok had been sent to teach a lesson to the heir of the Arzak house. He asked her with a sharp voice to watch her tongue. Since the priest was not in the temple, but in the palace, Liana assured that according to secular laws, she could punish whoever insulted the royal family. The priest shouted that, even in that case, the princess could not contravene the Lord's will and marry a sinner. But suddenly, the man stopped abruptly, and he fell because behind him, the voice of that same impious barbarian was heard. Lord Ivakan apologized to the princess for being late. The priest jumped up and protested the presence of that barbarian in the audience hall. But Liana ignored that question. She greeted the fiancé and offered him a seat next to her. The young man asked, where did the conversation leave off? Liana replied that their god opposes her wedding with the fiancé. The priest was perplexed, and he couldn't say anything. Liana pointed out how evident the effect of the change in strategy was. Now the princess understood that alone she seemed defenseless and weak. She asked how long God would make her wait before the marriage. The priest began to tremble and stammered that they had to wait until the Lord gave permission. Liana asked how he would know. The man replied that, like before, through a representative. That is, through him. The Lord asked if he correctly understood that in the end, everything would depend only on the priest's words. The boy said he would give God's representative a choice. Sell him his mouth, or the Lord would open it himself. He clarified that this was too soft. He wouldn't open it, but he would simply tear it out himself. The priest protested. What is this about? But the Lord asked him not to shout and behave appropriately in front of the royal family. Lord Tibakan reminded the priest that the choice was still his. But if he didn't make it himself, the Lord would have to help him. The priest shouted that it was inadmissible to treat a representative of God on earth like this. As soon as Lord Tivakan quietly uttered the command to close, the only door in the room closed immediately. The priest protested, asking what that was, and asked Her Highness to do something, since such discourtesy was inadmissible. Lord Tivakan affirmed that he would act exactly as the princess ordered. If she gave the order to open, it would open. The protagonist explained that since the conversation was not yet over, it was right for the door to remain closed. The priest begged Her Highness to regain her composure and act sensibly, but the princess did not answer. Instead, she proposed continuing this fascinating conversation. She asked him again why the wedding ceremony should be postponed. The Lord informed the priest that the funerals would be held tonight, and the princess would attend, while the wedding would take place on the scheduled date. Liana was surprised that it was resolved so quickly. The priest didn't even argue the Lord's conditions. She was surprised that for the first time they had reached an agreement. Meanwhile, the Lord ordered the knights to move the coffins to the chapel. A second later, the princess understood why the priest had been so compliant. She understood that if she did what the Lord asked, she could get a large budget from him for the restoration of the staircase. The princess told the fiancé that it was too much, since the Lord had already spent a lot because of the bride. The truth is that the high priest was already scared, and he would not have insisted on postponing the wedding. So the expense was unnecessary. The Lord asked not to take his words as rudeness, but he did have the right to manage his money as he wished. Liana mentally noted how pleasant it was that my Lord resolved and took care of her problems voluntarily. The fiancé seemed to have become her ally, but the true reason for his behavior would be revealed when Knight Viros arrived. Meanwhile, she could relax and enjoy the feeling of security next to the fiancé. The young woman thanked the Lord for the funeral and the marriage ceremony. That would take place without setbacks soon. Lord Tibakan asked if the bride had been serious all that time. The young woman asked for clarification. Did my lord ask if she really didn't want to postpone the wedding? Liana answered yes, and the young man was surprised by her words. She herself was surprised by her answer, because at one moment she had started to see the fiancé and the wedding as something inevitable. Suddenly, the princess noticed that Lord Tibakan was starting to smile. an expression she had never seen on him before. Milord said that expenses would not be saved. And the young woman understood that it sounded as if he was genuinely happy to marry her. Those around her consider her fiancé a horror, because they don't know him well. In reality, he is a good man whom the princess sincerely appreciates. Meanwhile, the Grand Chancellor was bursting with fury in his palace. He wondered if it was really so difficult to insist on postponing the wedding, or how a coward managed to become the high priest. Sir Lyndon regretted that there was no other choice but to find someone else for this task. Lafitte asked what his uncle meant, and replied that there was nothing to gain from that priest. He no longer had the strength to watch power remain in the hands of the daughter of the House of Arzek. Lyndon Fertile declared that he wished to replace the chief bishop. His nephew asked how he planned to do it, since the position of chief bishop was for life. The man said that if the chief bishop died suddenly, it would take time to find a replacement. That is, there will be no one to officiate the wedding ceremony. And without it, the marriage is impossible. Lafitte shouted that the uncle could not act like that, because if it were discovered, the consequences would be unpredictable. The chief chancellor laughed, pointing out that his nephew was soft and weak. That's why they took the woman away from him. Lafitte shouted that they hadn't taken her away, that not everything was lost yet, and that he would return her. Sir Lyndon asked if his nephew still didn't understand anything, then indicated that today was the right day, and that they should wait for nightfall at the cemetery. When the priests were bringing the coffins down from the mountain, a stranger in a hood appeared. A knight told the old man to move away, because it was dangerous there. The stranger, with a trembling hand, pointed at Lord Tibacan and asked him in a hoarse voice who he was. The knight asked if the old man did not know the great commander of Tibacan, the leader and god for his subordinates. Then he said it was time for the old man to leave there, since he had found out what he wanted. The man prayed mentally, could it be that my lord has returned to avenge the crime of Naka, and to shed the blood that was not shed that day? The knight shouted at the old man that he no longer tolerated repeating that he had no place there. At night the time for the burial arrived. Many people had gathered around the chapel. The princess was surprised. Madame Flambeau said there was a reason for it. Everyone was interested and curious. At first the princess didn't understand anything, but then she remembered that everyone believed that Sir Fertile had died. It turns out that Her Highness will come to the funeral of her beloved with her new fiancé. Liana understood that a bad situation was brewing. Someone might start saying negative things about Lord Tibacan. Especially the Grand Chancellor might take advantage of the situation and start spreading slanderous rumors. Madame Flambeau said that the lady could not cover the ears and eyes of all those present, so it would be better to warn my lord about this. The princess agreed, but something told her that her future husband would react with total calm to people's words. In reality, she had never seen him angry. But even if he didn't get angry, the pressure would be enough to affect him. So she didn't fear him at all. Maybe just a little anxiety. In general, he inspires strange feelings in her. But Madame Flambeau noticed that the princess was daydreaming and asked her to watch where she was walking, since the path could be uneven. Just then, a branch fell at her feet. It turned out that the branch belonged to the unknown old man in the hood. The nanny asked the princess if she was okay, but Madame interrupted her, clarifying that she knew the old man. She had seen him near the temple, and every time she went there, she gave him alms. Liana said that at that moment she had no money, and that she couldn't offer anything to the man, since she was going to a funeral. When the young woman handed him the staff, the old man grunted and mumbled something about sin and blood. Liana asked him to repeat it, since she hadn't heard him clearly. Then he said it out loud. The heiress of the Arsacid house must be prepared for when blood will soon be shed. The young woman couldn't believe what she had heard. Madame Flambeau insisted that it was not appropriate for the princess to get so close to a stranger, since you never know what to expect from him. But Liana replied that everything was fine. The old man was just trying to tell her something. The girl asked him to repeat it, but she only heard growls and loose sounds. At that moment, Lord Tibacon's loud voice sounded. "What is going on here?" The nanny explained that the princess had stopped near an unknown old man in a hood. Then the boy asked if the bride needed more time. But Liana concluded that this poor man doesn't seem able to speak. She said she had to leave, as she might be late for the funeral. But if the old man had something to say, let him come later. Lord Tivikin asked why the girl's face was so pale. Was she feeling unwell? Liana replied that she was fine, just worried that the funerals would go smoothly. His lordship affirmed that he had ordered his guards not to lose vigilance. And Liana thanked him. So, the young man said he would go first to supervise. And Liana's mind kept repeating the old man's words. For some reason, those words made her heart feel heavy. In the hall where the funerals were to be held, people gradually began to gather. The priests informed Her Highness of something, and she exclaimed that it was complete madness. Then she asked who saw him last. One of the priests admitted to having seen the chief priest arrive at the royal chapel. Another priest reported that until that day, no one had left the chapel when Lord Tibakin entered with his assistant. My lord asked what was happening. The princess explained that it was time to start the funeral. But the whereabouts of the chief priest were unknown. The lord asked his assistant if he knew anything. But the young man replied that he had no idea. Sir Lyndon Fertile overheard the conversation taking place in the hall among the commoners. Lord Tivikin affirmed that if there was an accident, it was carefully planned by someone. Farimos indicated that he would take care of it immediately. Since the lord, as always, was right. As soon as he was out of sight, the princess asked Lord Tivikin if he thought someone had done it intentionally. He replied that it was probable, since it was known that the chief priest was disliked by many people. Why did the lord's gaze fall upon Sir Fertile, who was sitting in the hall? Suddenly, Farimos's cry was heard announcing that they had found the chief priest. A young man ran into the hall and reported to the lord saying that, apparently, they had managed to find the priest. Farimos ran to the coffins and affirmed that the chief priest must be there. The young man explained that, according to the coffin attendant, one of them was heavier than the others. So, the young man decided to open the lid of the coffin. Her Highness exclaimed, horrified by what she saw. Lord Tivikin pointed out that there was no better place to hide a body. Pharaoh said it definitely wasn't an accident, since someone took the trouble to hide the body. When the princess concluded that the high priest was killed, she noticed that the Grand Chancellor was the most surprised. As if he knew nothing, he, just like the other people present in the hall, sighed sadly and was indignant that someone had done such a thing on such a day. Suddenly he asked who would conduct today's funerals. Not only those present in the hall, but the priests also took up the question. They concluded that it was urgent to convene a council of elders, since the position of high priest was vacant. The Grand Chancellor told the princess that such an important position should not remain vacant. Therefore, as soon as the council is over, and the name of the new high priest is known, he will come out and announce it. Sir Lyndon Fertile declared that the funerals had been postponed again, and he asked his subordinates to take care of the coffins. The princess's anger could be felt miles away. To try to calm the bride, the lord took her hand and asked her not to take it as a personal loss. The lord declared that now he was also responsible for the safety of science, and that he would look for the culprit together with the princess. The heroine noted mentally that the fiancé was right, since the house of Arzak now had new guard knights. Those days are gone, when the princess simply endured backstabs. Whoever is involved in the murder of the high priest, and whoever power they possess, they will pay for it. Sir Lyndon made a fatal mistake. He didn't consider that it is no longer possible to repeat the previous crazy crimes. The protagonist concluded that she no longer wants to live in a state of constant anxiety. To free herself from this feeling, she must start with the elimination of a specific enemy. And obvious. Therefore, Liana resolutely proposed to the Lord that they start looking for evidence against the murderer. At night, in Lord Fertle's castle, there was a great commotion. The Grand Chancellor was throwing words and dirty objects at whoever killed the high priest. The man protested, wondering how he dared to put the body in the coffin, since it was enough for the mercenary to pass it off as an accident. Sir Lyndon pushed the mercenary and shouted why he did it. He wanted to be caught. The poor man covered himself with his hands and shouted that there wasn't enough time. Besides, there were too many witnesses in the temple. The Chancellor pointed out that it was a weak excuse and began to kick the mercenary. Then he said he hoped he hadn't left any traces, since through this wretch they could discover that it was Sir Lyndon who ordered the murder. He asked why the mercenary, with his chicken mind, didn't think of throwing the corpse down the stairs, as happened when murdering the previous high priest. Sir Lyndon repeated that no one should ever find out that it was his order, since one cannot be careless with barbarians. Otherwise, he would get rid of the mercenary himself. The man, coughing blood, replied that he understood. Amazing that, after so much beating, he could still speak. The funerals were in full swing. The coffins were already next to the dug graves. Lord Tibacan and his assistant observed the situation to maintain control. Meanwhile, the princess distributed fragments of gold from furniture to the families of the deceased soldiers. It was the only valuable thing she had left. Fermo pointed out that it was not surprising that Her Highness was poor. Now he clearly understood the cause of her situation. Lord Tibacan objected that, in his opinion, generosity and kindness are qualities worthy of a ruler. He added that, of course, the princess should also care about herself, not just others. The Lord's assistant pointed out that there were rumors that Her Highness didn't even have mourning clothes and had to alter an old dress. The Lord recalled that precisely because of her character and her intelligence. The princess accepted his proposal. Fermos had no choice but to agree. Then he wanted to know the Lord's opinion on why Sir Felter killed the chief priest in that manner, since he doesn't seem like a foolish man. The Lord said that, during the extraction of the body from the coffin, the chief chancellor's face showed excessive surprise. Clearly, these were not feigned emotions. Did he conclude that something went wrong? Or was there no intention to kill? Or did the hired killer make a mistake? The Lord asked the subordinate to investigate the situation, and he himself jumped off the mount. He noticed that the princess had already been freed. Fermo wondered if the Lord was bothered by seeing his fiancée with her head bowed in bitterness over the loss. For the battles in which he participated with Lord Tibacan, such a low number of dead is a miracle. But clearly, the Lord still pities the princess. He cares about her, as he is not one to ignore the feelings of the one he loves. He promised once to return her, and sooner or later, everything will return to its place. Perhaps it would have been better if the Lord had proposed to the princess much earlier, before she had an official partner. Maybe then so many people wouldn't have died. The assistant couldn't believe that his lord would change so much for love. Now the author moves us to the princess's palace. The protagonist was shivering from the cold in her bedroom, and she thought that if it was so cold now, what would happen in winter? Liana already regretted getting out from under the warm blanket. But it was morning, and she had to get up. She decided to wash her face, so the drowsiness and shiver from the cold would turn into freshness and vitality. Upon opening the bathroom door, she screamed because Lord Ibakan was half naked there. He asked, embarrassed, if the princess wanted to shower first. She told him that, first of all, she wanted to know why the naked fiancé was in her bathroom. The Lord replied that the princess was funny after sleeping, and reminded her that from now on, it was also her bathroom. Liana remembered their recent agreement, and apologized for her rudeness. Since she was still half asleep, she ran out and scolded herself for forgetting her deal with the fiancé and creating an awkward situation. Through the door, she shouted to him that the Lord could shower first, and not worry, as it would not happen again in the future. The Lord replied that everything was fine, and then asked why the most important thing was missing in the bathroom. The bathtub. The girl replied that it was there before. Large, luxurious, and with golden edges. But the marble was broken into pieces that are now used in Felter's garden. The girl said she had no choice but to sell everything that could bring money. Liana pointed out that it seemed irrational to her to use a lot of water when bathing. The girl asked if he needed it. He replied that he hadn't said anything about wanting to shower now. The young man added that it would be good at some point to accept her together with the bride. The protagonist was surprised. Surely, the spectators were also impressed by the Lord's requests. The girl became nervous, wondering why the fiancé wanted to do it this way. For a moment, she imagined how that would happen, but immediately stopped and began to vehemently deny that possibility. Feeling ashamed for having thought about it, Liana returned to her room and lay down on the bed with the idea that she must always be alert with her Lord, since he was the one causing everything, because he was so attractive and said strange things that made Liana blush. The protagonist mentally forbade herself from feeling those feelings for that boy, since first she had to find out what he had in mind. Many had told her frankly that Lord Tibacon's goal was revenge. The girl decided that she should meet that old man with the staff. When the Lord and his assistant were reviewing documents, a guard entered the office and reported that the princess had left the palace. He added that they told him the lady had gone to the temple to distribute food to the needy. Firmos commented on how diligent and good the princess was, and then asked who had accompanied her. The guard replied that she only took one night with her. And the Lord got angry, asking what one man could do. The Lord asked who had the sanity to let her go to that dangerous place. The subordinate asked what he could do. He couldn't hold her by force. Then he remembered that the Lord himself had ordered his soldiers to behave appropriately with her and create a friendly atmosphere. The Lord said that was so. But it was worth asking. Firmos asked if a guard had at least been assigned. The knight timidly said that they had already sent one person and proposed sending more. So Firmos ordered several to be sent, because one didn't know what could happen. The Lord commented that he could go there, since working was boring. The assistant told the Lord that it was not necessary for him to go personally. The knights would be enough. Firmos pointed out that there were still many documents that the Lord had to review. Besides, it was urgent to find the murderer of the high priest. The Lord affirmed that he was sure his assistant would handle it perfectly. But Firmos exclaimed that this task could not be completed alone. As he was leaving, the Lord cried out that, in that case, it made even less sense for him to be there. My Lord's assistant remained alone in the office and reflected that the Lord was abandoning him again. The last time he left him to follow the princess. Now he overwhelmed him with work. Who would have imagined that love would turn the Lord into someone like this? When the princess arrived at the temple, she asked the companion to wait for her there. He questioned if his lady didn't want to delegate this task to him, since he would do it quickly. But the princess clarified that she herself wanted to distribute food to the needy. She entrusted the companion with supervising the situation, especially that Sir Felter's soldiers should not appear. The young man wished the lady to be careful, while she thought about how to find that old man. No one should know what she would discuss with him, at least until Sir Barrows returned. After walking for a while, Liana finally found him. But she was surprised when a stranger threw a bread roll at the old man. Probably one of the temple employees had decided to feed the poor man. Suddenly, the old man threw the bread aside and began to hit the stranger with his staff. The young woman couldn't stand the scene and shouted for them to stop him. She tried to understand what was happening and asked the old man why he was hitting the one who brought him food. Then she asked the stranger if he had done anything wrong to the old man, why he held a grudge against him. But no one answered her. On the contrary, the stranger, upon meeting the young woman's gaze, decided to move away immediately. Liana begged him not to run away. She caught up with him, pulled off his hood, and uncovered his face with a bleeding wound on his head. She understood that this wound didn't seem caused by staff blows. It is obvious that this wound is old, since there is a lot of dried blood on his forehead. Liana asked how it happened. The stranger quickly put the hood back on and mumbled that he had prayed for redemption. She asked him to clarify why the boy was bleeding then, and he replied that during redemption, blood must be shed. The girl thought it was strange, because no God would want his children to shed blood and suffer. She asked if the boy had received adequate treatment. He remained silent. Then Diana understood that he hadn't done it, and fervently begged him to take care of himself and heal the wounds. Otherwise, she will send an official message to the temple, or she will go there herself. The stranger remained silent. Diana asked if he would say his name, and he whispered that his name was Clima. The princess concluded that it was a pleasure to meet him, and now Clima could leave. Then she approached the old man and told him it was his turn to speak. Then the heroine decided to pose the main question that had worried her in recent days. She asked against whom and why Lord Tibakan wished to take revenge. The old man fell down. Then Liana reminded him that he himself had spoken to her about it recently. Therefore, it would be better if he told everything now. After a long silence, the old man finally cleared his throat and addressed the young woman as if she were the heir of the house of Arzaka. Suddenly, someone called the princess. It turned out to be her companion. Liana asked what was wrong. He enthusiastically informed her that Lord Tibakan was heading this way. The protagonist's face showed surprise and disappointment, since she understood that she would have to postpone that conversation again. She knew that the fiancé, in no case, must find out who this old man was. So she asked the commander to delay Milord a little. A little later, Liana went out to meet him. Seeing his fiancée, Milord was overwhelmed by her beauty. He commented that he even took a moment to recognize Liana, since she no longer looked like the princess at all. The young woman blushed and explained that the clothes looked worn and old-fashioned simply because she had been wearing them for a long time. Milord said that in reality, the young woman was simply beautiful. She wondered why he was throwing dust in her eyes. What's with all the compliments if his only obsession is revenge? The young woman interrupted him, saying that Milord only needed to stop being so smooth. There was nothing special about her. The young man offered her his hand. She wondered why he was doing that. Why was he so kind and gallant to her? The princess asked why the Lord was there. He replied that he happened to find out that the princess had left the castle. That's why he decided to accompany the bride. But she had probably already finished her business. Liana replied coldly that it was so. Then the Lord asked if the princess usually walks alone. She objected that she is not alone. The commander of the royal guard is with her. The young man pointed out that he alone is not enough. Liana replied that Naka is so small that she doesn't need the escort of the entire guard. The Lord said he didn't agree, and recalled how Sir Lyndon forcibly restrained the princess and almost forced her to marry. The boy asked to be called next time. The girl replied that it wouldn't be possible, since the fiancé has much more to do than her. He replied that now taking care of his fiancée's safety and accompanying her is part of his duties. In moments like this, the protagonist especially liked that the fiancé was so kind to her. She asked when the temple repairs would begin. The Lord replied that when they choose a new cardinal. Liana mentally noted that the Lord is very intelligent. He probably wants to make sure the wedding really happens. And that's why he isn't rushing to pay for the repairs. However, if the Lord were truly her destiny, he would always support the bride. Liana thought bitterly in her heart that then she could breathe easily. The girl was so absorbed in her thoughts that she didn't hear the carriage approaching quickly from behind. Suddenly, the knight shouted at the Lord to turn around immediately. Lord Tibakan and the princess turned around, but it was already too late. The cart with the barrels overturned. There were many, and they were very heavy. So when the barrels fell and rolled, the princess and the Lord were shocked and tried to save themselves. The Lord shouted his fiancée's name, and pushed her aside. After the commotion, the princess regained consciousness. A scream alerted that someone was crushed. Her heart stopped with fear. The protagonist didn't want to believe that something had happened to the fiancé. She got up with difficulty and stumbled in search of him. Just then, a hand covered Liana's mouth and asked her not to scream. She recognized Lafitte's voice. Her ex-boyfriend whispered in her ear that he didn't want to be seen. The next instant, he pushed her into his carriage and ordered the coachman to leave immediately. Liana exclaimed that Lafitte was a complete madman, and she didn't understand what he was doing. She reminded him how she had asked him in the past to disappear silently and without leaving a trace. The girl was surprised and angry at his recklessness, but the kidnapper did not react to her words. He took Liana's hand and spoke to her as if she were his beloved. The young man said that honestly. He was glad she hadn't been injured, since he had suffered so much for fear that the incident would harm her. He added that he had long dreamed of being able to talk to her in a secluded place. Just the two of them, with nothing to interrupt them. The girl tried to let go of his hand, but she couldn't and called him a complete lunatic. She was desperately worried about what was happening outside and how Lord Tivakin was feeling. She ordered him to stop talking nonsense and to stop the cart immediately, since in the last second, instead of saving himself, the milord pushed the bride aside. There wasn't even a small window in the cart, and the heroine couldn't stay still, worrying about milord's condition. Of course, her terrible assumptions tortured her. But the princess tried to think positively and believed everything was fine with the fiancé. But Lafitte convinced his beloved Liana otherwise and advised her to calm down, as Lord Tivakin had been dead for a long time. He added that the girl could relax and stop pretending to be the worried bride, since there was nothing more to worry about. Lafitte told her that not even his beloved could imagine how long he had waited for this. He assured her that he had planned it for a long time and hadn't made a single mistake. Lord Tibakan definitely wouldn't have survived if they had buried him under such a quantity of heavy barrels. Lafitte boasted about having foreseen everything. He warned his knights, therefore, even if the Lord is still breathing when they find him, they will take care of everything. Upon hearing these words, the princess was shocked. She couldn't believe it. Meanwhile, the carriage kept moving farther and farther away. But the young woman knew that Lafitte was lying, since the Lord had lived for 10 years in an area with constant combat. He couldn't have died like that from a sudden accident in the street. The girl mentally convinced herself that fate couldn't be so cruel to her fiancé. Not to him. The protagonist's tears began to fall. She shouted that it was all a blatant lie. The Lord couldn't have died. Liana became so enraged that she managed to pull her hand free from her ex-lover's tight grip. The angry young woman ordered the young man to leave and never set foot on Naka's lands again. Lafitte asked her to be honest at least with herself, since he knew that the young woman still felt affection for him. Liana shouted that it was her final warning. If he ever returned, she would take action herself. The kidnapper probably didn't hear the princess's last words, since strange sounds were heard, and the carriage shook violently. Lafitte angrily hit the front wall of the carriage, so the coachman would understand he had to drive more carefully. However, in response, the boy only heard complaints. He wondered what was happening. Suddenly, something seemed to shove the carriage hard. Lafitte didn't even have time to understand what it was. The carriage suddenly braked. The boy failed to stay in place and crashed into the princess. A second later, the carriage door burst open, and for an instant, the sun blinded Liana. Squinting hard, she managed to make out the outline of her fiancé. The protagonist remembered that it had happened before. The sun entered the tent, and there she saw the Lord for the first time. Then she thought my lord looked like a large beast and fierce. At that moment, it seemed to Liana that at any moment, he was ready to sink his teeth into his enemy's neck. That's how he looks right now. Suddenly, Lord Tibakan grabbed the leg of the scoundrel who had fallen on top of the princess. He pulled him out of the carriage and threw him far away. Thanks to this movement, the young woman understood how intense the emotions in her fiancé were. Since lifting a person is not an easy task. Then he told Liana she could get out of the carriage. The young woman had not yet recovered from the shock, so she didn't even move. The Lord asked if he would have to drag her out. After that question, the protagonist reacted and objected that she would get out on her own. Meanwhile, Lord Tivacon's knights had already grabbed Lafitte, who begged Liana to order them to release him. Deep in her soul, the protagonist was glad that Milord was alive in front of her, since she had already been very upset. Suddenly, the young woman noticed a drop of blood falling from her fiancé's body. Anxiety returned to the young woman, who exclaimed horrified since Milord had been injured. The princess tried to examine the young man, but he sharply pulled away from her hands, claiming that the wounds were not serious. The young woman clarified that her intentions were good. The Lord asked in a displeased tone if she cared whether the wounds were deep enough to kill. Liana's face reflected perplexity. She didn't understand why her fiancé was saying such terrible things. Milord recalled that he once promised that he would only allow the illegitimate son of the Felters to be humiliated once. Everyone knew the first time had already happened. Then, suddenly, something became clear to the young woman. After an unexpected attack during a walk, Milord woke up and took care of everyone. But the princess was no longer there. So he chased the carriage and found her with her ex-lover. Moreover, in a compromising situation. The young woman understood that this awkward situation could easily be misinterpreted. So she laughed softly and stated that Milord had misinterpreted everything. Liana explained that she didn't board the carriage voluntarily, and that she only understood it wasn't an accident when they forcibly dragged her inside. The Lord stressed that if the princess claims she knew nothing about it, then the matter changes completely. It seems the illegitimate heir of the Felter house dreamed of betraying his family. Milord ordered his knights to bring the prisoner, since he wants to cut off his head right here. He ordered the condemned man's body to be thrown away, and his head sent to his family as a gift. That's where the true barbarian shows his nature. Liana did not expect this outcome, and surely the spectators are also surprised. The young woman rushed straight towards Milord and begged him not to kill the captured man. He retorted that he had already told her not to come close. But the princess kept imploring. Then she asked if in Naka the procedure is to let traitors pass. Liana replied that the Felter house would never forgive such a death, and that she fears she won't be able to control the consequences. The Milord replied that that was nonsense, and that he would always be there to help her. But the protagonist knows that things are not that simple. If the Felter family declares war on the royal house, then all the aristocrats will rise up with them. Lord Tibicon will not stand aside, and will strike a merciless blow. Then Naok will divide. A civil war will begin, and the kingdom will be destroyed. She mentally concluded that enough blood had already been shed in science. She should have ended the relationship with Fite from the beginning, and accepted Lord Tibicon's proposal, and not allowed Sir Felter to travel to the neighboring kingdom seeking help. Perhaps many victims would have been avoided that way. It wouldn't have gotten this far. The princess wouldn't have needed to lie, or invent every month how to hide her condition, nor her inexperience. The girl wouldn't have to ask herself so many questions about what she really feels. The princess continued to beg her fiancé not to touch the traitor. She explained that she wanted to save only Nock, not that wretch. But the Lord said he didn't believe her. He added that he could no longer trust the princess, since she came up with believable excuses too frequently, and forgot her promises. She begged him to believe her now, because everything she said was the truth. The Lord replied that the princess had lied to him for so long that now he wouldn't believe anything she said. The girl said she was willing to risk everything if the boy believed her. The Lord replied that the bride had developed a bad habit. Did she intend to use the same method as before, and thus deceive him again? Liana exclaimed that my lord was saying that. But such an idea hadn't even occurred to her. My lord stated that from now on, he didn't care what plans the bride had, since he had already decided not to trust her. He inquired if the young woman still wished him to forgive the prisoner, and she nodded in agreement. The young man, displeased, commented that he would finally let him go, just so the princess wouldn't bother him anymore. The lord declared that in return, he would ask the princess for something. He pulled her towards him and told her that tonight she must sleep with him. Liana froze like a statue. My lord called one of his knights and ordered the prisoner to be tied tighter and taken far away. The subordinate asked if the lord didn't intend to kill him. The lord replied that his orders were not to be questioned. He also ordered the princess to be accompanied to the castle, and he would leave first. The knight objected that it was not advisable to travel alone. And on horseback, he shouted to the lord that he was suffering serious injuries. But Lord Tivikin didn't even turn around. Seeing the somber lady, Madame Flambit asked what had happened to her. After all, she had only gone to distribute food to the needy. Then the nanny questioned why there were so many companions around the princess. If she had only gone out with the commander. The young woman replied that a lot had happened, but they would tell him later. Now she wished to take a bath. Madame Flambit asked if there was still water left for her, and proposed going to the chambers. Liana thanked the knights and allowed them to leave, but they said they would stay until further orders from the lord. The princess replied that the castle was safe, that she didn't need a guard. The knights said that was just their opinion. The lord thinks otherwise. Only when the chamber doors closed firmly, and the princess and the nanny were left alone, they could speak openly. Madame Flambit asked worriedly what happened for the knights to be here guarding the lady. Liana replied that she would tell everything, but first she needed to sit down for a moment and rest. The nanny asked her not to sit on the floor. The young woman said that if she sat on the chair she would get dirty, and they would have to wash the padding. And now there are enough chores. The nanny asked if something happened during the walk. Liana remembered my lord's hurt words that he no longer trusted her. Those words stabbed her heart like a dagger. The princess felt it deeply, although she and the fiancé are similar in that he doesn't trust her. When Madame Flambit heard from the princess that Lord Felter wanted to kill Lord Tibican and capture her, she started whimpering, exclaiming and mentioning the lord. Then she asked about the condition of the barbarian chief. The princess replied that he is alive, but seriously injured. The nanny was indignant. What does Her Highness have to do with it? If it was Sir Felter who did it. Not her. The protagonist asked how she knew that the lady was being accused of something. The woman pointed out that it was enough to see how these rude people behave before they pretended to be so kind. The girl thought she had heard a lot about the cruelty and the rudeness of the barbarians, but until now, she hadn't noticed anything like that. Even now, when the lord is upset with the bride, only his tone becomes harsher. He always behaves respectfully towards her. Liana said that the lord believes she is allied with Lafitte. Madame Flambe asked if it was true. The princess was indignant that the nanny could think such a thing, especially since my lord controls the entire palace. One would have to be crazy to do something like that. The woman asked, why then did my lord think that? Liana couldn't answer anything coherent, and just sighed sadly. The woman added that, if one thought about it a little, it was not surprising that the barbarian chief believed so, since he is sure that the bride is carrying another man's child. The princess admitted that she did not regret having lied to my lord about that in their first meeting, because she had something to protect. She got tired of constantly lying. It turned out to be very heavy. In general, questions were spinning in her head. How much longer would all this last? Would they ever learn to trust each other? The nanny asked why the princess simply didn't tell the lord he was mistaken. The lady replied that she tried, but the fiancé didn't believe her, since it is complicated when trust is lost. The protagonist was sure that nothing would change now, especially since her menstruation days would soon arrive. Then she wouldn't be able to hide anything. But she cannot tell the fiancé the truth and ask him to believe her. The girl said she would go wash to calm down a little. The nanny asked her to stay a little longer. But Liana asked the nanny to bring clean clothes. Madame Flambe said she would bring water too. The princess said she could do it alone. But the nanny had already left. Liana entered the bathroom with the idea that everything would be fine. The main thing is that Lafitte and Lord Tibacan were still alive. Now nothing threatened Notch. Everything was fine, but a memory of how the fiancé had asked her to sleep with him. This night invaded her. She mentally decided that it was completely inappropriate and impossible. She shouldn't even think about it, since the wedding had not yet taken place. The protagonist wanted to lock the door, but immediately realized she was acting foolishly. The fiancé wouldn't force his way in or compel her. He was definitely not that kind of person. While undressing, the protagonist noticed that her back was covered in bruises, and she wondered how it happened. And at that moment, she remembered how today, during the kidnapping, the carriage had shaken, and she had hit herself. The young woman did not like the ugly look and painful look of her back, but the lord was much more injured. She wondered how he would feel if the milord was really all right. The knights wouldn't have tried to dissuade her from riding. The young woman sincerely hoped that the lord's wounds had been treated, and that everything was fine with him now. Suddenly, the door swung wide open. Lord Tibacan stood motionless in the doorway. Liana also froze, not knowing how to react. They both stood in shock until the princess finally broke the uncomfortable silence with her scream. She complained about the fiancé being there. The young man said there was probably a problem with the door lock, that it was broken. That's why he didn't notice the girl was here. Liana stammered that the boy needed to leave immediately, since she would be freeing the bathroom soon. The lord looked seriously at the princess and asked if she was injured, since her hand and back looked terrible. He asked if the bride had been hit by a barrel. She admitted that it probably happened when they forcibly put her into the carriage. It seemed that out of anger, Lord Tibacan even roared like a beast. She asked her fiancé to turn around, since even though they were engaged, the situation was still inappropriate. Milord said that, it seemed, he was mistaken. Liana asked him again what he had said, but he brusquely replied that it was nothing. He apologized and slammed the door shut. The protagonist was perplexed and didn't know what to think in such a situation. The princess changed clothes in her chambers and mentally complained about how horrible the lord was. How could a strong enough lock break accidentally? Suddenly, the girl wondered if my lord, being so strong, would use force to take her. Then she wouldn't be able to resist. Although when Liana asked him to leave the bathroom, he didn't even argue. The girl decided she shouldn't leave an injured person alone in the bathroom. She should help him. For example, bring water. While pouring water into the basin, she noticed that the lord was someone who wouldn't do something he didn't want to. Then she knocked on the door and shouted that he could come in now. But no one answered. She thought maybe the lord had walked away. So she left the bathroom to look for him. A few meters from the bathroom, the lord lay unconscious on the floor. She ran to the lord and began to beg him to wake up. Quite some time passed before he finally opened his eyes and asked what had happened to him. Liana replied that she had opened the door and found the lord on the floor. He replied that he probably waited too long and fell asleep. With Sorna, she asked if the fiancé had really decided to sleep on the floor. She affirmed that if jokes were set aside, it was evident that the lord's wound was bleeding. The princess deduced that the lord had lost too much blood and fainted. The young man replied that everything was fine now, since he had woken up. But the princess didn't think so. She wasn't happy because her fiancé didn't understand the severity of his injuries. He doesn't treat his wounds, doesn't want to ask for help. He just endures the pain. It was incomprehensible to the protagonist why Milord cared so much if someone else was injured, and at the same time, was so indifferent to his own well-being. Liana helped him sit up and then, in an authoritative tone, asked Milord to undress. The young woman firmly announced that she would help him bathe. She couldn't stand by watching someone who had just fainted. He said there was no need to worry about minor injuries. Everything was fine. Liana replied that it didn't seem true. She got angry because the Lord always insisted on refusing, and ordered him again to undress. She just wanted to help him. Milord asked why the bride was acting this way now. The young woman replied that she was the one who should ask, since it wasn't the first time Milord had reached this state. He complained that the girl hadn't understood him at all. It wasn't about that. Then he asked her if this was her way of showing him gratitude, because the Lord wouldn't have killed that prisoner. He added that if so, the bride was wasting time, since he needed something completely different. Liana retorted that this was not a show of gratitude. She simply wanted to treat his wounds. He asked, surprised, why it was precisely the princess who wanted to do it. She replied that it was because he was her fiancé. But to her surprise, the Lord's face remained impassive. He didn't look particularly happy, although that was to be expected. The girl thought that, if she were in the fiancé's place, she would also be confused after what happened today. The Lord mentioned that it was uncomfortable to say now, but he generally bathes naked. The protagonist's eyes widened a little, since she hadn't considered that the young man simply claimed not to remove his underwear. So Lord Tibakan, naked, sat directly in front of the protagonist. She screamed in surprise, since there wasn't an unblemished spot on my lord's body. She asked if the boy thought he could solve it alone. He asked, surprised, what difficulty there was, since he would simply rinse off with water. Liana thought the injuries were much more serious than she imagined. The girl thought that, if she were injured like that, she wouldn't even be able to get up. The only thing that comforted her was that the old arrow wound had almost healed. When Liana ran the cloth over Milord's back, he frowned and roared in pain. The girl apologized and said she didn't imagine it would hurt the fiancé so much. But now she would be more careful. The boy denied it, saying it didn't hurt at all. On the contrary, it was too soft. The girl deduced that Milord was simply ticklish, since the fabric was very soft. She said she would try to finish quickly, but Milord denied there was any rush. After a while, Liana announced that she was done with the back. Milord could handle the rest alone. The princess timidly offered her help if Milord wished. The young man asked if the girl was offering just because he was her fiancé. Liana replied that no. She simply found it difficult to clean the wounds properly. The Lord apologized for the question. It's just that with so much attention, it started to seem like the bride was trying to quickly repay the favor. Liana replied that it was not so at all. Above all, she was calm because Milord was not a man who would force her into something terrible. Milord asked if she correctly understood that the princess had just said that being with him was terrible. The girl stammered that it wasn't that, only that the fiancé clearly wouldn't force her into anything if she wasn't ready. The young man asked why she came to that conclusion. Liana replied that the fiancé had been kind all this time, and tender with her. Milord said that it was completely different. Liana replied that no. The Lord remained kind to her, even though she rejected him. The young man said he didn't understand if the princess was cunning and calculating or simply too naive. He asked if the bride understood everything, and still said such things to the fiancé, knowing what happened today and what will happen tonight. Liana replied that she knew enough, and she perfectly remembered what he did today to save her. Suddenly, Lord Tibakan said things couldn't go on like this, and asked the bride to leave the bathroom before he couldn't control himself anymore. Liana was inwardly pleased, as she knew from the start that the boy wouldn't ask to be paid for the service. She said she knew perfectly well that Lord Tibakan was an honorable man, and advised him to stay still so she could take care of her fiancé as she wished. The exhausted protagonist barely made it to her chambers, and threw herself onto the bed without strength, because when she finished washing her hair and treating the wound, the dinner time had long since passed. Liana wondered mentally how Lord Tibakan had endured for so long, since even a simple bruise caused him intense pain. She concluded that it was all Fite's fault. Why couldn't she accept that everything between them was over? The Lord ordered the scoundrel locked up. So he is locked up somewhere. When Sir Lyndon finds out, there will be a real uproar. The girl decided she should think of something good to distract herself from the pain. At that moment, in the protagonist's mind, her fiancé's voice sounded, asking her to leave while he could still pretend to be good. His request was severe, but his voice was just as soft. Although at the same time, Liana felt in danger, as if she were naked and unarmed in front of a fierce predator. The girl knew that in reality, the Lord would never cause harm. Maybe that's why she felt so comfortable beside him. She was ashamed that at first, the Lord had seemed contradictory to her. Suddenly, Liana heard the door creak and asked scared who is there. The candle illuminated Lord Tibakan's face. Astonishment appeared on the princess's face, since the Lord had said he came to collect payment. Liana stuttered that the Lord is not that type of person. He wouldn't do it. The young man wondered, didn't the princess do what she wanted? Why can't he do what he wants? The young woman asked, what does the fiancé plan to do? He replied that he won't do anything that clearly bothers the bride. The young woman asked what jar he has in his hands. He replied that it is medicine, and asked the princess to turn around. He added that he won't ask the bride to take off her clothes. He just needs to sit as close as possible. Then he asked her to be patient, even if it stings a little. A moment later, the young woman protested and asked what the Lord intends to do. He replied that he just wants to take care of his fiancée. The young man pointed out that although the princess was demanding with him, she herself doesn't feel like taking care of his health. Liana assured him that she would catch up on her own. The boy remembered that then he could bathe himself, but he humbly accepted the bride's help. He pointed out that now it was her turn. The princess asked, wasn't the fiancé going to collect payment? The young man replied that he decided to substitute that request with this action. The protagonist asked her fiancé why he decided to do that. The boy replied that it was obvious from the beginning that the princess had no intention of treating her wounds. The girl demanded that milord hand over the remedy, but he protested, since otherwise he wouldn't be able to touch the bride. In reality, Liana was pleased to hear it, and even smiled a little. The young man added that Liana had multiple bruises in hard-to-reach places. Liana asked him to hurry up, but he replied that he had gone through the same thing and endured the bride's touches. Besides, he simply didn't want to rush, and he would apply it calmly, enjoying the moment. The girl pointed out that such words were not appropriate for someone who would be rubbing someone else's back. The boy replied that manners didn't interest him now. Liana asked if he didn't like to appear proper. He replied that it was useless now. The protagonist asked what the cause of such bold behavior was then. Milord said quietly that he did it to take possession of the princess.